You think these men are dangerous? Emily Carter looked the sheriff dead in the eyes, her voice steady as stone. My husband smiled at church every Sunday. He was the dangerous one. She turned her back on him and walked straight through the doors of Iron Wolf's Bar, the most feared Hells Angels clubhouse in Arizona, and never looked back. Before we go any further, if this story moves you, please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning. The night Emily Carter ran, she didn't pack a suitcase. She didn't write a note. She didn't call anyone. Because calling anyone meant Daniel would know within the hour. That was the world she had lived in for 3 years, a world where every phone call was monitored, every text message read, every friendship quietly strangled before it could breathe. Daniel Cross didn't raise his voice often. He didn't need to. He had a far more effective weapon than rage. He had money. He had lawyers. He had a smile that made people trust him before he ever opened his mouth. And for 3 years, that smile had kept Emily completely trapped. She grabbed the backpack she had hidden behind the water heater 6 weeks earlier. $43 in bond, mostly fives and ones, she had quietly skimmed from grocery runs over 2 months, coins she had collected from the bottom of her own purse because Daniel controlled every bank account, every credit card, every financial thread of her existence. She had nothing else. No identification in her own name that Daniel hadn't found a way to compromise. No car that wasn't tracked. No phone that wasn't monitored. But she had $43. And she had the key to Daniel's second car, the old Ford pickup he kept in the garage, and almost never drove because he had never once considered that she might use it. That was the thing about Daniel Cross. For all his intelligence, for all his careful control, he had one enormous blind spot. He had stopped believing she was capable of surprising him. That was his first mistake. His last would come much later. Emily waited until the house went completely quiet. It was 11:47 at night on a Thursday in late October, and outside the windows of their beautiful Nevada home, rain was hitting the glass in long diagonal sheets. She remembered standing in the hallway, backpack on her shoulders, listening to the sound of Daniel's breathing through the bedroom door. Slow, even, completely unaware. She remembered thinking, this is the last time I will ever hear that sound. And then she walked out the front door and didn't close it gently. She let it shut with a soft, ordinary click. The sound of a woman who had simply stepped outside for a moment, the sound of nothing unusual at all. She was 3 miles down the road before she let herself breathe. She drove through the night with both hands on the wheel and her jaw set tight because if she let herself think too hard, if she let herself feel the enormity of what she was doing, she would pull over and fall apart. And she could not afford to fall apart. Not yet, not here. Not anywhere Daniel's people might find her on the side of a Nevada highway at midnight, a woman alone with $43 and no plan except away. She drove south, then east, then south again. She stopped once for gas, paid cash, kept her head down, didn't make eye contact with the attendant. She stopped once more at a rest area somewhere in the dark heart of the desert, turned off the engine, and sat in complete silence for 4 minutes. Then she started driving again. She had been a hotel manager before she met Daniel. She knew how to assess a situation in seconds. She knew how to solve problems that other people gave up on. She knew how to keep herself composed when everything around her was chaos. But right now in this car on this highway, those skills felt very far away. Right now, she was just a 32-year-old woman running from a man who had spent 3 years convincing her that she was nothing without him. The irony, she thought, was that Daniel had been the one to teach her how to disappear. He had done it so thoroughly, erased her friendships, her career connections, her sense of her own history, that when she finally vanished, there were barely any threads left for him to pull. The engine gave out somewhere around 4 in the morning. She felt it first as a shudder, then a grinding, then a sound like the whole mechanical heart of the truck, losing its rhythm. She managed to coast to the shoulder of the highway before it died completely. She sat there for a long moment, staring at the dashboard, rain hammering the roof. She opened the door and stepped out into the storm. The highway was empty in both directions. No lights, no sound except the rain and the distant crack of thunder somewhere to the south. She stood there getting soaked for about 30 seconds before she realized that standing in the rain wasn't going to fix the truck. She grabbed her backpack and started walking. The first lights she saw were maybe 2 miles down a cracked side road that peeled away from the highway into the darkness. Small lights, a cluster of them. The kind of lights that meant town, not a big town, not a town with hotels and chain restaurants, but a town, which meant shelter, which meant people. The sign at the edge of the road read, Black Ridge population 2,847. She walked those 2 miles in the rain without stopping. Black Ridge, Arizona looked like a town that had made a decision a long time ago to stop competing with the rest of the world. One main street, a diner with half its letters burned out, a gas station, a hardware store, a small motel with a vacancy sign that flickered. She considered the motel for a moment, did the math on her $43, and understood immediately that she couldn't afford more than one night, and one night wasn't enough. She needed work. She needed it immediately. Emily Carter had never been the kind of woman who sat down and waited for a solution to arrive. Even during the worst years with Daniel, even when her confidence had been systematically dismantled, piece by piece there was something deep in her, some core of herself he had never quite reached that kept telling her, figure it out. You always figure it out. So she started walking the length of the main street, reading every sign, cataloging every window, looking for anything that said help wanted, or now hiring, or any variation of the same. That was when she saw it. At the far end of the main street, past the diner and the hardware store and a shuttered video rental place with its old sign still up there, was a building with a heavy wooden door and a neon sign glowing red and amber through the rain. Iron Wolves Bar. Beneath it, a smaller sign handwritten on a piece of cardboard that someone had taped inside the window, bartender wanted. Apply in person. She almost kept walking. She almost turned around, went back to the flickering motel and told herself she'd figure out something else in the morning. But then a man came out of the bar, and he must have seen her standing in the rain staring at the sign because he stopped on the doorstep and looked at her the way people in small towns sometimes look at strangers, not unfriendly exactly, but measuring. You lost, he asked. No, Emily said. I'm applying for the job. The man looked at her for a long moment. He was big, broad across the shoulders, maybe 60 years old, with a face that had been weathered by decades of sun and wind. He wore a leather vest over a black t-shirt, and even in the rain from 10 feet away, Emily could see the patches on that vest clearly enough. Iron Wolves MC. The man said slowly, You know what this place is? It's a bar, Emily said, with an opening. He looked at her for another moment. Then he said, You'd better come inside. Inside Iron Wolves Bar that night, Emily Carter met a room full of men who were not expecting her. The bar was long and low, full of smoke, and the sound of a country song coming from somewhere in the back. Maybe 30 men were spread across the space at the bar, at the tables, a few standing along the walls. Some of them were older, graying with the particular stillness of men who had seen enough that nothing surprised them easily. Some were younger, harder, with watchful eyes. All of them wore the same leather vest with the same patches. Every single one of them turned to look at her when she walked in. The room didn't go silent all at once. It went silent in pieces the way a stone drops into still water, the quiet spreading outward from where she stood until the whole bar was holding its breath. Emily had worked hotel management for 7 years before she married Daniel Cross. She had handled drunk guests and irate customers and staff crises at 2 in the morning. She had once talked a man out of throwing a chair through a lobby window. She was not fundamentally a person who frightened easily, but she would admit, standing in that bar with 30 pairs of eyes on her, that her heart was beating faster than usual. She did not let it show. The man who had brought her inside, she would learn his name later, Marcus. One of the junior members walked her to the far end of the bar where a single man was sitting on a stool with a glass of water in front of him. Not a drink, just water, watching her come toward him with the calm, unhurried attention of someone who had spent his whole life reading situations before they fully formed. He was 55 years old. He had a gray beard, close cropped. His eyes were the particular shade of dark brown that in certain lights looked almost black. His leather vest was older than most of the others in the room, the patches worn to softness by years. The name tag on the upper left read Raven. Below that, a title she was not yet familiar with enough to fully understand President. Marcus says you want the bartender job, the man said. Yes, Emily said. She did not sit down. She stood straight, her wet hair pulled back, her soggy backpack on one shoulder, her $43 still tucked in her front pocket. I saw the sign in the window. That sign's been there 3 weeks, Raven said. Nobody locals applied. I'm not local, Emily said. He looked at her for a moment. No, he said. I can see that. Where are you from? Nevada, she said. She said nothing else. He nodded slightly as if that told him something. You have experience. 7 years hotel management. Before that, 2 years waitressing and 2 years behind a bar. She kept her voice even. I can manage inventory handle, cash run tabs, manage difficult customers, and I can work whatever hours you need. Raven looked at her steadily. We're not a normal bar. I can see that, Emily said. This is an MC establishment, he said. That means the people who come in here have particular expectations about how things work. They're not always easy. They don't always follow the rules that apply in regular places. I've managed difficult environments before, Emily said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Why are you in Black Ridge? It was the question she had been waiting for. The question she had been preparing her answer to since she first saw the neon sign. She had considered several versions, vague references to needing a change, to passing through, to visiting someone. All of them had felt wrong. All of them had felt like lies she would eventually have to maintain. So she told him the one true thing she could tell him without telling him everything. I'm starting over, she said. I needed to get out of Nevada and I needed to do it quickly, that's all. Raven studied her face for a long moment. Whatever he was looking for, he seemed to find it. You know, he said quietly, I've been running this bar for 22 years. In that time, I've hired exactly 3 bartenders who weren't connected to this club in some way. All 3 of them quit within a month. He paused. You want to tell me why you'd be different? Emily looked at him directly. Because I don't have anywhere else to go. It was the most honest thing she had said to anyone in 3 years. Something shifted in Raven's expression. Not softness exactly, this was not a soft man, but a kind of recognition. The look of someone who understood what it meant to have no retreat. I'll give you a 3-day trial, he said. You work the bar for 3 days. You follow the rules I give you. At the end of 3 days, we talk again. What are the rules? Emily said immediately. He held up one finger. Respect the club. What you see in here, what you hear, it stays in here. You don't gossip. You don't talk to outsiders about our business. You treat every person in this room with the same respect, whether they make you nervous or not. Second finger. Stay out of club business. There are parts of what we do here that don't concern you. When those conversations happen, you do your job and you don't ask questions. Third finger. Don't lie to the people protecting you. If something is wrong, if someone bothers you, if you feel unsafe, you come to me or you come to the man I'm going to introduce you to. You don't handle it alone and you don't pretend. Emily nodded. I can do all of that. Can you? Raven said, not challenging, genuinely asking. Yes, Emily said. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, one more thing, and this one's not a rule, it's just advice. She waited. The people in this room, as he said, have spent most of their lives being judged by people who never took the time to understand them. They've been called dangerous, criminal, violent, some of it true, most of it not. What they respect is not fear and not flattery. He paused. They respect people who show up and do what they say they're going to do. You show up. You do your bob. You treat them like people. That's it. Emily nodded. What's your name? He asked. Emily, she said. Emily Carter. He extended his hand. Victor Blackwood. People here call me Raven. They shook hands. He called Marcus back over and told him to show Emily where the stockroom was and where the inventory lists were kept. As Marcus walked her toward the back, Emily heard Victor Blackwood say something to the man sitting next to him, his voice low, but not so low she couldn't catch it. I want Jake to keep an eye on her. She did not know at that moment who Jake was. She did not know at that moment what those words would mean for the rest of her life. She only knew that she had a job, she had a roof for the night. Marcus mentioned there was a small room in the back that the last bartender had used, and she had survived the first hour of her new life. It was, she thought, a start. She found the inventory list exactly where Marcus said it would be, in a battered 3-ring binder on a shelf above the stockroom door. She opened it, scanned the first 2 pages, and felt something familiar stir in her chest, the particular sensation of a problem presenting itself waiting to be solved. The inventory system was a mess. Not chaotic exactly, but disorganized in that particular way that happens when several different people have maintained the same document over years without ever establishing a consistent method. Items listed in different units, prices from different years mixed together. Stock levels recorded in pencil that had been partially erased and rewritten so many times the numbers were barely legible. For the first time since she had walked out of her front door in Nevada, Emily Carter felt something close to calm. She understood this. She knew how to fix this. This was something she could do. She worked through the rest of that night behind the bar, learning the layout, introducing herself to the bottles, memorizing the register. The men watched her. They always watched her. She could feel it, a constant, low-level awareness of being observed, but gradually over the course of the night, the watching shifted in quality. In the first hour, it had been testing, maybe hostile. By midnight, it was something more like curiosity. By 2 in the morning, when she had served 40-some drinks without getting a single order wrong and had defused a minor argument between 2 men at the far table by producing the correct drink, before either of them could escalate further, it was beginning to look something more like consideration. She noticed the man Victor had mentioned, Jake, sometime around 10 o'clock. She noticed him because he was the only person in the bar who wasn't looking at her. He was sitting alone at the far end of the bar, nursing a beer with the careful, measured pace of someone who was drinking out of habit rather than desire. He was maybe 38, lean, with dark hair starting to gray at the temples, in a way of sitting that was very still without being rigid, the stillness of someone who was paying complete attention to the room while appearing to pay attention to nothing at all. She had met men like that before, men with that particular quality of contained alertness, usually in hotel security, sometimes in law enforcement, always in situations where the job required watching everything without being seen to watch. He never once looked directly at her, but she understood instinctively and immediately that he was watching her more closely than anyone else in the room. She also understood, and that this was the part that would take her longer to fully process, that this did not make her feel threatened. It made her feel, for the first time in 3 years, something she had almost forgotten the name of: safe. She didn't have time to think about that. She had drinks to pour and tabs to keep track of and a bar to close down at 2:30 in the morning, which she did methodically and efficiently, mopping the bar top and restocking the coolers and wiping down the tables while the last customers filtered out into the night. When the place was finally empty, when the last patch of neon had been switched off and the chairs were up on the tables, she went back to the small room Marcus had shown her, a narrow space with a cot, a dresser with 3 drawers, and a window that looked out on the parking lot. And she sat on the edge of the cot and allowed herself for the first time to feel the full weight of what had happened in the last 24 hours. She had run. She was in Arizona. She had $43 and a job in a Hells Angels bar. And for the first time in 3 years, nobody knew where she was. The relief of that, the sheer overwhelming relief of simply being unknown, hit her so hard that she sat there for a long time just breathing, hands pressed flat on her knees, not crying, not yet, just feeling the sensation of being her own person in a place that Daniel Cross had not yet contaminated. Then she lay down on the cot, still in her clothes, her wet shoes on the floor beside her, and she slept for 9 hours straight, the longest she had slept without waking in almost 3 years. She woke up to the sound of someone knocking on the door. It was Marcus. He had a cup of coffee in each hand and an expression on his face that she would eventually learn was as close as he got to friendly. "Raven wants to talk to you before the afternoon shift," Marcus said. Emily took one of the coffees. "What time is it?" Nearly noon. She hadn't slept past 7 in 3 years. Daniel liked early mornings. He had opinions about productivity and discipline and the moral superiority of people who rose before 6. She had spent 3 years waking to an alarm at 5:45, regardless of what time she'd gone to sleep. "Tell him I'll be ready in 20 minutes, she said. She was ready in 15. Victor Blackwood was at his usual stool when she came back into the bar. There was another man with him this time, the quiet man from the night before, the one she had noticed without meaning to. Jake. Up close, he was a little older than she'd thought. Not 40 probably. There was something in the way he held himself that made him seem seasoned rather than old. His eyes, when he finally looked directly at her for the first time, were gray, the particular shade of gray that shifted depending on the light, darker in shadow, almost silver in direct sun. He didn't smile. He didn't introduce himself immediately. He just looked at her with those shifting gray eyes with the same quality of attention she had noticed the night before. Victor said, "You know who this is, Jake," Emily said. "You mentioned him last night." Victor glanced at Jake. Something passed between them, one of those silent communications that happen between people who have known each other long enough to speak in looks. "Jake Morrison," Jake said. His voice was lower than she expected, a little rough, the voice of a man who didn't use it more than necessary. "I handle security for the club and the businesses we run." "Okay," Emily said. "Raven asked me to check you out," he said. He said it without apology, just straightforward, as though this was simply information. "After you came in last night, standard practice with new people." Emily looked at him steadily, and he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Emily Jean Carter, age 32, born in Columbus, Ohio, hotel management degree from Ohio State. Worked at 3 hotels in Nevada over 7 years, most recently as general manager at the Harrington in Reno. Married Daniel Cross, Nevada businessman, approximately 3 years ago. No prior criminal record. No current outstanding warrants." He paused. "The truck you arrived in is registered to Daniel Cross." The coffee cup was warm in her hands. She kept her grip on it, even and steady. "That's accurate," she said. "You want to tell me why you're in Black Ridge instead of Reno?" "I already told Raven that," she said. "Tell me," Jake said. Not aggressive, just quiet and direct. She looked at him. She had gotten very good over 3 years at reading the intentions behind questions. Daniel had asked her questions with hidden barbs inside them. Questions designed to trap or reduce or expose. This was not that kind of question. This was the question of a man who needed accurate information to do his job. "I left my husband," she said. "I needed to go somewhere. He couldn't find me quickly. The truck broke down here. I saw the sign." She paused. "I'm not in trouble with the law. I'm not running from anything except a bad marriage. I'm not going to bring problems to this place." She looked at him directly. "That's everything." Jake held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once. "Okay," he said. It was 2 words less than she had expected. She had expected conditions, follow-up questions, a negotiation. Instead, she got that single syllable of acceptance, clean and uncomplicated. Victor said, "Jake's going to be around the bar more often while you're getting settled. Not because we don't trust you, because until you know how things work here, it's good to have someone nearby who does." Emily nodded. "I appreciate that." Jake looked at her once more briefly and then looked away. She went back behind the bar. That afternoon was different from the night before. Quieter, fewer people, the particular lull of a Wednesday afternoon in a bar that did most of its business after dark. She used the time to finish her assessment of the inventory system, making notes in the margins of the binder, mapping out what would need to change. An older man named Deke came in around 3 and sat at the bar and ordered the same beer twice before she'd figured out his routine. She had it ready the second time before he asked. "Good memory, Mom," he said, looking at her with something between surprise and approval. "Hotels," she said. "You learn to remember what people want." "What kind of hotel?" he asked. "General management," she said. "Mostly, a little of everything." Deke nodded. He was in his mid-60s, she guessed, with white hair, pulled back and the easy, settled quality of a man who had long ago decided that hurrying was for other people. "You know, Raven used to run a hotel," Deke said. Emily looked up from the binder. "No, not a real hotel," Deke said. "More of a motel, desert place, mid-70s. He was 20 years old and he was managing a 12-room place off Route 66. Deke took a drink of his beer. "He'll tell you it was the worst job he ever had and the best education he ever got." She filed that information away. At 6 o'clock, the bar began to fill. By 7, it was at the same capacity as the night before. She moved faster this time, having memorized the layout of the bottles overnight, having a rough sense of who drank what. She made fewer extra trips. She anticipated faster. She was also, she realized, sometime around 8, beginning to learn names. Marcus and Deke she already had. There was a man called Trigger who only drank whiskey and always asked for it neat. A younger man named Rico who ordered beer for himself and water for the 2 men he arrived with every single time. A big barrel-chested man in his late 40s called Bishop who ran some kind of legitimate business. She heard the words construction and contract floating in the conversations around him, and who tipped generously and said please and thank you with the particular deliberateness of someone who had been raised to believe those words mattered. She learned their rhythms. She learned who wanted to talk and who wanted to be left alone with their glass. She learned that the tables in the back corner near the pool table had a specific rotation, and that disturbing it was the kind of thing that caused friction. She learned this because at 8:15, a man she didn't recognize sat at one of those tables, and by 8:17, three men she did recognize were watching him with the careful, non-aggressive, but absolutely unmistakable attention of people who were about to have a conversation about boundaries. She got there first. She carried a beer to the table, set it in front of the man who was maybe 40, looked like he'd driven a long way and was clearly not a regular, and said quietly, "This table's usually reserved. There are a few open ones near the front." The man looked up at her. Then he looked past her at the three men who were watching. Then he looked at her again. "Yeah, okay," he said. He picked up the beer and moved. The three men at the back turned back to their conversation as if nothing had happened. She was back behind the bar before any of them said a word to her. But she caught from the corner of her eye Jake Morrison at his stool at the end of the bar, watching what had just happened with that particular quality of attention he had not pleased exactly, but something close to it. Something that looked, if you knew how to read it, like the beginning of respect. She didn't let herself read too much into that. She had things to do. At 11:15, Victor came to the bar. He didn't sit down. He stood across the counter from her, arms folded, and he said without preamble, "You handled that situation at the corner table." "Yes," Emily said, without being asked. "It seemed like the efficient solution," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "You know what that table situation usually becomes? A conversation that takes longer than it needs to and probably ends with someone leaving anyway," Emily said, "but with more tension first." Victor's expression didn't change exactly, but something in his eyes shifted. "You're going to be more trouble than I thought," he said. She couldn't tell for a second how to read that. Then she caught the edge of something at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one, and she understood that he meant it as a compliment. "Probably," she agreed. He walked back to his stool. She turned back to her bar. Behind her, she heard Jake Morrison make a sound that was almost a laugh. When she finally closed the bar at 2:30 and finished the closing procedures faster tonight, more efficient, she'd already streamlined the checklist in her head and went back to her small room in the back. She sat on the edge of the cot again. She thought about Daniel somewhere in Nevada, probably waking up to an empty house in a few hours, if he hadn't already. She thought about the truck on the shoulder of the highway. She thought about $43 in a 3-day trial, and she thought about Victor Blackwood's 3 rules. Respect the people protecting you. Stay out of what doesn't concern you. Don't lie to the people protecting you. She thought she could do all of those things. What she did not yet understand, what she had no way of knowing, on that second night in Black Ridge, Arizona, lying on a narrow cot in the back of an Iron Wolves bar, with the sound of the parking lot settling into quiet outside her window, was that those 3 rules were going to be tested in ways she couldn't imagine. That the man sitting alone at the end of the bar every night was going to become the first person in 3 years who understood her without her having to explain herself. That the club she had walked into with $43 and no plan was going to become the thing standing between her and a man who had spent 3 years learning how to make her disappear. That the most dangerous-looking place she had ever walked into was the first truly safe place she had found in years. But that was still ahead, for now she slept. And somewhere in the distance, 3 states away, Daniel Cross was beginning to realize that his wife was gone and beginning to make the particular kind of phone calls that wealthy men make when they want someone found. The 3rd morning arrived the same way the 2nd had. Marcus at the door, 2 coffees, the same expression that wasn't quite friendly, but was no longer cautious. Emily had started to understand that for Marcus, showing up with coffee was as close to a welcome as he gave most people. She took the cup, thanked him, and was dressed and behind the bar in 12 minutes. She had already decided what she was going to do. The inventory binder was sitting exactly where she had left it, her pencil marks still in the margins. She had been thinking about it since 2 in the morning when she should have been sleeping. The problem wasn't just the disorganization, the problem was the waste underneath the disorganization. 3 different beer distributors charging 3 different prices for overlapping products. A liquor order placed weekly when a bi-weekly order, with adjusted quantities, would cut costs by almost a third. Perishables ordered in quantities that assumed a customer volume the bar hadn't seen in months based on the stock dates she'd been quietly noting. She pulled up a stool, opened the binder to the first page, and started writing. She was still writing when Victor came in at 9:15. He stopped when he saw her. She had the binder open, a legal pad beside it, and she had already filled 4 pages with notes, numbers, and a rough comparison table she'd constructed from the receipts she'd found clipped to the back of the binder. "What is that?" Victor said. "Cost analysis," Emily said without looking up. "Your beer costs are running about 38% higher than they need to. You've got 3 distributors all competing for the same shelf space, and nobody's negotiating any of them. You're also ordering Jack Daniels in quantities that suggest you're going through about 40% more than the sales receipts show." She paused and looked up. "Either there's significant unrecorded consumption happening, or there's a theft problem. Probably the first one, but worth knowing." Victor stood very still. He said, "You've been here 3 days. 2.5, Emily said. "But the numbers don't change based on how long I've been looking at them." He walked to the bar slowly and sat down on the stool across from her. He looked at the legal pad for a long moment. "You did this last night," he said. "And this morning," she said. "I can walk you through it if you want." He was quiet for what felt like a full minute. Emily kept her face neutral. She had done this before, presented uncomfortable financial findings to people who hadn't asked for them. It almost always went one of 2 ways. Either the person got defensive and dismissed everything, or they leaned in. Victor said, "Walk me through it." She walked him through it. He asked 3 questions. All 3 were sharp, precise, the questions of a man who understood business fundamentally, even if the specific numbers had slipped past him. She answered each one directly with the exact figures to back them up. And when she was done, he sat back on his stool and looked at her with that expression. She was beginning to recognize the one that meant he was recalibrating. "Who taught you to read financials like this?" he said. 3 years managing hotel budgets," Emily said. "And a husband who was very, very careful about money." She said the last part without inflection, but something in the air shifted slightly, and she saw Victor catch it, file it, and say nothing about it. That was another thing she was learning to appreciate about him. He knew which questions to ask and which ones to leave alone. "The 3-day trial," he said after a moment. "Yes," she said. "It's done," he said. "You've got the job. Full-time regular hours, plus whatever you need to sort out the supply situation." He named a number, the weekly wage, and it was more than she had expected, enough to think about, enough to start with. She said, "I'd like to talk about the stockroom organization too when you have time." He almost smiled. "How about you write me a list?" She was already reaching for the legal pad. The word spread through Iron Wolf's bar the way information always spreads through close-knit communities. Not with announcements, but through the specific silence that means something has been settled. By the time the afternoon crowd came in that day, everyone knew Emily Carter wasn't a 3-day experiment anymore. She was the bartender. She was staying. The reactions were varied, which she expected. Most of the men simply continued treating her the same way they already had, with the watchful neutrality of people who were withholding full judgment, collecting more data. A few shifted into something more like acceptance. Partly, she suspected, because of the corner table situation the night before, which had apparently been discussed in her absence and interpreted accurately as competence. And a few were less easy about it. The most direct was a man called Carver, who came in mid-afternoon on the 4th day and sat down at the bar with the specific energy of someone who had rehearsed what they were going to say. He was maybe 45, thick through the shoulders, with the kind of face that defaulted to suspicion. He put his elbows on the bar and looked at her and said, "So you're the one Raven's keeping." "I work here," Emily said. She was already reaching for his usual. She had memorized it the day before, a draft beer, the local brand, always with a glass, not a bottle. She set it in front of him. He looked at the glass for a moment, slightly thrown by the fact that she'd had it ready. "Hells of a time to bring in an outsider," he said. "I'll be honest," Emily said, meeting his eyes calmly. "I'm not sure what the right time would be. But I'm here and I'm working, and that's what I've got to offer." Carver looked at her with that suspicious face. Then he took a drink of his beer. "You don't know anything about this club," he said. "You're right," Emily said. "I don't. I'm not trying to." She moved down the bar to refill someone else's drink, then came back. "I'm trying to do my job. That's it." Carver watched her for a moment. Then he said more quietly, "You're not scared." "I've been scared before," Emily said. It didn't help me much. He looked at her for another beat. Then he picked up his glass and turned back to whatever he'd been thinking about before she came along. She had a feeling that wasn't the end of the conversation, that Carver was a man who made up his mind slowly and changed it even more slowly, but it was enough for now. Later that evening, she mentioned it to Jake in the particular offhand way she had started finding to exchange information with him, not conversations exactly, more like brief transmissions across the bar when the noise level provided cover. "Carver's watching me," she said, setting a glass of water in front of him that he hadn't asked for but always seemed to want. "Carver watches everyone," Jake said. "It's a specific kind of watching," she said. "Not hostile, more like assessment." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Carver's the one who let in the last person who caused a problem for the club," he said. He said it carefully, like he was giving her exactly the information she needed and nothing extra. "He didn't catch it in time. He takes the responsibility personally." Emily absorbed that. "So it's not about me." "It's partly about you," Jake said, "but mostly it's about him." She nodded and moved on to the next customer. What she was learning day by day was that Iron Wolf's bar operated on a system of trust that had been built over decades through very specific experiences of betrayal and loyalty. The men here weren't difficult because they were irrational. They were difficult because they had excellent historical reasons to be careful. Every piece of resistance she encountered had a story behind it. Every test was rooted in something real. Understanding that changed how she handled everything. She stopped trying to win people over in the conventional sense, stopped the unconscious performance of likability she had developed during her hotel years, the professional warmth that was genuine but also calibrated. She replaced it with something simpler. She showed up. She did the work. She was consistent. She didn't make promises she couldn't keep, and she didn't pretend to know things she didn't know. And it worked. Slowly, unevenly, in the way that real things always build, but it worked. By the end of the second week, Deke had started talking to her about the club's history during the slow afternoon hours. Not the criminal history, not the public reputation, but the actual human history. The founding members, the town. They'd settled in the businesses they'd built across 30 years. She listened without asking questions, just taking it in, understanding that being given that history was itself a form of acceptance. By the middle of the third week, Trigger had started warning her in advance when he was going to need a second round so she wouldn't have to interrupt what she was doing to come back to him. It was a small thing, but it meant he had started thinking about her as someone whose time was worth considering. And by the end of the month, something happened that she hadn't expected. Victor called her into the back office. The office was small, organized in the way of someone who thought in systems not clean exactly, but with an internal logic that made sense once you understood it. He had papers on his desk spread out, and he was looking at them when she came in. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He pushed one of the papers toward her. It was a profit and loss statement for one of the club's legitimate businesses, a construction supply company called Ridge Materials based in Black Ridge and operating across 3 counties. "You haven't seen this," he said. She looked at it. "This is bad," she said after 10 seconds. "Yes," he said. "How long has it been running like this?" 14 months. She looked up. "Who's been managing it?" "A man who is no longer with the company," Victor said. His voice was completely flat when he said it. She understood from the flatness that she should not ask follow-up questions about that particular sentence. "Okay," she said. "What do you want from me?" "I want your eyes on it," he said. "Not management. I have someone for that. Just your eyes. A couple hours a week. Tell me what you see." Emily looked at the paper again. Then she looked at him. "This is a significant amount of trust to give someone you have known for a month." "Yes," Victor said. "Do you have a problem with that?" She thought about it for a genuine moment. "No," she said. "I just want to make sure we're clear about what I'm doing and what I'm not doing. I'll look at the numbers. I'll tell you what I find. I'm not going to sign anything, and I'm not going to make decisions on the club's behalf." "That's exactly right," Victor said. She took the papers. She found 3 significant problems in the Ridge Materials accounts within the first week. Not fraud or not entirely fraud, more like a pattern of decisions made by someone who was managing for short-term appearance rather than long-term stability. Inflated inventory reports that made the quarterly numbers look healthy while the actual stock was depleted. Vendor contracts that renewed automatically at rates that had been competitive 2 years ago, and were now significantly above market. A payroll structure that had accumulated redundancies over years without anyone trimming it. She wrote it all up cleanly with specific numbers and specific recommendations and gave it to Victor the following Thursday. He read it in front of her. When he was done, he set the papers down and looked at her and said, "You could have made this vague." "Why would I?" Emily said. "Because specific findings mean specific accountability," he said. "Vague findings give everyone cover, including you." She looked at him steadily. "I don't need cover," she said. "I need to do the job correctly or not do it at all." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "The man who was managing this before you, do you know why he failed?" "Based on the accounts, he was optimizing for his own security," Emily said. "He was making the numbers look good enough that nobody would ask too many questions, because as long as nobody asked questions, his position was safe." "And you," Victor said, "what are you optimizing for?" It was the most direct question he had asked her. She felt its weight. "Honestly," she said, "right now I'm optimizing for being useful enough that I get to stay." She paused. "But I can only do that by doing good work. Fake good work won't hold up, and I'm not capable of it anyway." Victor looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up, which meant the meeting was over. "Good," he said, and that was all. She was 3 steps out the door when he said, "Emily." She turned. "The reason Raven is a title and not my name," he said, "is because ravens are the birds that warn the others when something dangerous is coming. I've been warning this club about dangerous things for 22 years. He paused. "You are very good at seeing what other people miss. That's a valuable quality. Don't waste it on small things." She carried those words with her for the rest of the day. She was behind the bar that evening when Jake appeared at his usual stool with his usual unhurried quality, and something in his posture was slightly different tonight, not tenser exactly, but more alert, the specific alertnesses of someone who was carrying information and hadn't decided what to do with it yet. She set his water down without being asked, same as always. He looked at it, then at her. "Raven told me what you found in the Ridge Materials accounts," he said. She waited. "That took guts," he said. "Turning in findings like that on a business you've been looking at for a week on behalf of people you've known for a month. It would have taken more guts to hide it," Emily said. He looked at her for a moment. Something crossed his face that she was beginning to be able to read, not quite surprised, because Jake Morrison was not a man who surprised easily. More like the quiet confirmation of something he had already suspected. "Where did you work before all this?" he said. "Before the hotel management." It was a slight detour from what they'd been talking about, and she recognized it as intentional. He was changing the angle. "Waitressing first," she said. "Bar work for a while, actually. My junior and senior years of college." "Where?" "Columbus," she said. "Sports bars mostly, Ohio State area, Friday nights during football season." Something shifted in his expression. "That must have been an education," he said. "Best training I ever got," she said. 50 tables, half of them, drunk all of them, certain they're your only customer. You learn to move fast and you learn to read rooms." He was quiet for a moment. Then unexpectedly he said, "I grew up in Columbus." She looked at him. "Really?" "East Side," he said. "Long time ago." She didn't know what to do with that exactly, so she just said, "Small world." "Getting smaller," he said quietly and picked up his water. She moved down the bar to handle a new order, but something had shifted in the air between them, some invisible recalibration. The information exchange they'd been conducting across the bar, careful, practical, entirely about the work, had just added a layer, a thin one, but a layer. She filed it away and kept moving. It was the following Tuesday when the first real test came. She was closing down the bar at 2:15, running through the closing checklist she had refined over the past 3 weeks when she heard voices from the back room. Not unusual, the back room sometimes had activity after hours that was none of her business, and she had learned to execute her closing procedures without looking in that direction. But these voices were elevated, which was unusual, and she could hear very clearly words she recognized as significant. Names, numbers, and the word shipment. She kept mopping the bar top. She did not slow down. She did not speed up. She did not tilt her head in any direction that would suggest she was listening. She simply continued doing exactly what she had been doing at exactly the same pace, with exactly the same expression on her face. But she heard it, and what she heard told her something specific and important that Ridge Materials was not being used exclusively for construction supplies. She finished her checklist. She turned off the lights she was supposed to turn off. She went back to her room. She sat on the edge of the cot for a long time. She had 3 rules. Victor had given them to her on the first night. The second rule was stay out of club business. What she had just heard was club business. The third rule was don't lie to the people protecting you. Those 2 rules were now in direct tension. She thought about it very carefully. She thought about it the way she had thought about the inventory binder, the way she had thought about the Ridge Materials accounts methodically without panic, laying out what she knew and what she didn't know and what the options were. She could pretend she hadn't heard anything. That was the easiest option and also the one most likely to get her into trouble, because if they ever found out she'd heard and said nothing, the third rule, don't lie to the people protecting you, would be broken retroactively. She could go to Victor immediately and tell him exactly what she'd heard. That was the honest option. It was also potentially the destabilizing option because she didn't yet know what she'd walked into or what the right response was. She could go to Jake. She stayed up until 4 in the morning thinking about it. In the morning, she found Jake before he left the building. He was in the parking lot by his bike doing whatever routine check he did before he rode anywhere. She had noticed that he was meticulous about it, the kind of methodical attention to machinery that men develop when they've learned the hard way what happens when you're not careful. I need to tell you something, she said. He looked up from the bike. Something in the way she said it made him go very still. Last night during close, she said, I heard something from the back room that I wasn't supposed to hear. He waited. I'm not going to tell you what it was, she said, because if I tell you the details, I've crossed into territory that isn't mine. But I want you to know that I heard it, and I want you to know I'm not going to do anything with it. She paused. I'm telling you because the third rule says not to lie to the people protecting me, and not telling you felt like lying. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, did you hear anything that scared you? Anything that made you feel unsafe? No, she said honestly. I just heard something that told me the situation here is more complicated than what I see from behind the bar. That's accurate, he said. I know, she said, and I'm okay with that. I'm not asking you to explain it. I'm just following the third rule. He looked at her for a moment with those gray eyes that she still hadn't fully learned to read. Okay, he said, that same 2-word response that meant something more than it looked like. I'll tell Raven you told me. Good, Emily said, and she went back inside. She was 3 steps through the door when she stopped because she realized her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from something else, the physical residue of a decision that had felt like standing on the edge of something and jumping. She stood in the hallway for a moment and breathed until they steadied. Then she went behind the bar and opened the inventory binder and started her day. Victor came in at noon. He didn't say anything about it directly. He sat at his usual stool, ordered water, and asked her a question about the Ridge Materials accounts, a follow-up question about one of the vendor contracts she'd flagged, and they talked about it for 15 minutes, and it was entirely normal. Just as he was getting up to leave, he said without looking at her, You handled last night correctly. She didn't ask him how he knew. She just said, good. He left. She exhaled. The weeks that followed had a particular rhythm to them. Not peaceful exactly, but functional, purposeful. She had not had that in 3 years. She had lived in Daniel's world where the rhythm was set by his moods and his schedule and his unpredictable calibrations of how much control was enough. Here the rhythm was set by work, by the club's honest needs, by the slow accumulation of trust that she was building one careful day at a time. She hired a part-time assistant for the bar, a young woman from the edge of town named Carmen, who needed the money and picked up the work fast. Training someone else forced Emily to articulate things she had previously just done instinctively, and the articulation made her better at them. She reorganized the stockroom in a way that cut the close-down time by 20 minutes. She renegotiated the beer distributor contracts, dropping one vendor entirely and using the leverage to improve the terms, with the other 2 saving the bar almost $800 a month. She did not bring Victor every finding immediately anymore. She began to understand which decisions were operational, hers to make, and which were structural, his to approve. The distinction mattered. And somewhere in all of this, somewhere in the accumulation of working days and late nights and conversations across the bar and early mornings with Marcus's coffee, Something else was happening that she was trying very hard not to think about. Jake Morrison was always there. Not intrusively, not possessively. That was the part she couldn't quite account for because in her experience, men who were always around were always there for a reason that would eventually show itself as a kind of ownership. But Jake's presence had none of that quality. He was there the way the bar's best regular patrons were, there consistently reliably with no agenda beyond whatever his genuine purpose was. And his genuine purpose, she had come to understand, was that he watched over the people in this place. Not with the heavy hand of control, with something quieter. He noticed when someone was struggling. He intervened when something was about to go wrong. He positioned himself always and consistently in whatever place would allow him to be most useful if something happened. She noticed one Thursday evening that he had done something specific. She had been handling a situation at the far end of the bar, a customer who was 4 drinks past where he should have stopped, and was getting the particular kind of loud that precedes the kind of confrontation nobody wanted. She had been managing it carefully the way she had managed it dozens of times, gradually slowing the drink, deliberately shifting her body language, talking the man down from whatever ledge he was approaching. And she had been doing fine. But when the man's hand had moved toward her arm, just the beginning of a move, not aggressive exactly, but crossing into territory that she had learned to watch for, Jake had appeared at his elbow without haste or drama, simply present, and had said something low and quiet that she hadn't been able to hear, and the man's hand had stopped and then retreated. Jake had then walked back to his stool. He had not looked at Emily. He had not made it a moment. He had simply done the thing that needed doing and then gone back to what he was doing. She stared at the back of his head for a moment. Then she poured 2 glasses of water, walked to the end of the bar, and set one in front of him. He looked at it, then at her. "Thank you," she said quietly. He said, "You had it." "I had it," she agreed, "but you saw it coming before I did." He was quiet for a moment, then, "That guy's got to tell. He rolls his right shoulder before he reaches for anything. I've been watching it all night." She absorbed that. "How do you know when to step in and when not to?" He picked up his water glass, turned it slightly in his fingers. "When the person handling it can handle it." He said, "You let them. You only step in when the equation changes." "And you decided the equation changed," she said. "I decided it was about to," he said. She looked at him for a moment. This man who had memorized the body language of every person who came through those doors, who had turned watching into something that was not surveillance, but something close to protection. Who had she now understood, been quietly noting her own patterns for 6 weeks, the way she moved behind the bar, the way she read customer moods, the particular quality of her voice when she was managing a difficult situation. "Jake," she said. He looked at her directly. "Something rare. Why did Raven ask you to watch me that first night?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because you walked in with nothing and you weren't scared. And in my experience, when someone isn't scared of something they should be scared of, there are 2 possibilities." He paused. Either they don't understand what they're walking into, or they've already survived something worse. She held his gaze. "You thought the second one." "I thought the second one," he confirmed. "You were right," she said. "I know, Mato," he said. And then very carefully, as if he was deciding to say it as he was saying it, "I'm sorry that's true." She stood there for a moment. It was such a clean thing to say. Not intrusive, not demanding, not an opening to a conversation she wasn't ready for. Just 3 words that acknowledged, without requiring anything in return, that something had happened to her that shouldn't have. She said, "Thank you." She went back to work. But for the rest of that night, something in her chest felt different. Like a room that had been sealed so long, the air inside it had gone stale, and someone had quietly opened a window, not thrown it wide, just cracked it just enough to let something new in. It was the 43rd day, and somewhere in Nevada, Daniel Cross had not forgotten where his wife was supposed to be. The call came on a Wednesday. Not to her, she had no phone that Daniel knew about yet. It came to the bar's landline, which still rang on the old phone behind the counter, the one that mostly got calls from vendors and the occasional lost traveler. She picked it up. A man's voice she didn't recognize said, "Is this Iron Wolves Bar in Black Ridge, Arizona?" "Yes," she said. "I'm looking for Emily Carter Cross," he said. He used both names. Both names, her name and Daniel's name, fused together the way Daniel had always insisted they should be used, as if her individual identity was only meaningful when attached to his. Her hand tightened on the phone. Her face did not change. "There's no one here by that name," she said. Her voice was completely level. "You must have the wrong number." She hung up. She stood behind the bar for a moment. The phone was still warm from her hand. The bar was doing its regular evening business around her, drinks being poured, conversations happening, the jukebox in the back, cycling through its rotation. She turned and found Jake at his stool, already watching her. She walked to the end of the bar. She said very quietly, "Someone just called asking for me by my married name. I told them they had the wrong number," and hung up. Jake's expression didn't change exactly, but something behind his eyes went very sharp, very focused, very quickly. "When did you last use a credit card?" he said. "I haven't," she said. "Only cash since I got here." "Your phone didn't bring it. It was on his account." "The truck registration," he said. She felt the cold understanding of it. "Daniel's name," she said. "The truck is in his name." Jake was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "The truck is still on the highway where it broke down." "I haven't had money to deal with it," she said. "That registration will have an owner address," he said. "And the towing company in Yucca County runs their records through a database that anyone with enough money can access." He paused. "It's not certain, but it's a possible thread." She absorbed that. "So he might know I'm in Black Ridge." "He might know you were in Black Ridge when the truck was towed," Jake said. "Whether he knows you're still here is different." He paused again. "Does he have the resources to run a private search?" She almost laughed, not with humor, with the specific feeling of a person who has been underestimating something for too long. "He has resources for everything," she said. "He's been controlling my life for 3 years. He has people for everything." Jake nodded once. He picked up his water glass, set it down, looked at it. "Okay," he said. "What does that mean?" she said. "It means I need to talk to Raven tonight," he said. "And it means you're going to be okay." He looked at her directly. "But you're going to have to trust us with more than you've told us." She stood there at the end of the bar. The jukebox was playing something slow. Somewhere behind her, a glass clinked. She thought about 3 years of learning that trusting people was the thing that gave Daniel more ammunition. She thought about the careful, methodical way she had held herself at arm's length from everyone here, giving just enough to do the job and nothing more. She looked at Jake Morrison, who had memorized the tells of every person who came through those doors and had spent 6 weeks quietly, consistently, without a single word of it being made into a demand, making sure she was safe. "Okay," she said, and for the first time since she had walked out of a house in Nevada with $43 in a backpack, Emily Carter decided to tell someone the whole truth. She told them everything. Not immediately. Not all at once. It came out the way things come out after they've been compressed for too long in pieces under pressure, with the particular rawness of words that have never been said out loud before. Victor sat across from her at the back office table. Jake stood near the door, not blocking it, just present. Marcus was somewhere outside, and she understood without being told that he was there, so no one would interrupt. Victor had poured 2 glasses of water and set one in front of her, and she had wrapped both hands around it, the way people do when they need something solid to hold on to. She told them about Daniel Cross. She told them about the first year of the marriage, which had been. And this was the part people never believed, the part that made her feel most ashamed in the telling of it, genuinely good. Daniel had been attentive, generous, magnetic. He had made her feel in those early months like she was the most capable and interesting person in any room they walked into together. He had praised her work, her mind, her instincts. He had listened to her talk about hotel management with what seemed like real fascination. She told them how it had changed so slowly she hadn't seen it happening, how the praise had become conditional, how the listening had become monitoring, how the generosity had calcified gradually into a system of control so comprehensive that by the middle of the 2nd year, she had no bank account in her own name, no credit card he hadn't co-signed, no professional contact she hadn't at some point introduced him to and watched him quietly undermine. She told them about the financial manipulation, the joint accounts that were technically joint, but practically his, the monitoring software on her phone that she had discovered by accident, and then pretended not to know about for 4 months because she understood with the bone-deep clarity of a person in a dangerous situation that knowing gave her an advantage she could not afford to reveal. She told them about the friends who had disappeared one by one through a process so gradual and so plausibly explainable that she had half convinced herself each departure was coincidence. She told them about the isolation, about waking up one day and realizing that she was in a beautiful house in Nevada with no one in the world who would take her call over Daniel's objection. She told them about the evidence she had collected. This was the part that made Victor sit forward. "What kind of evidence?" he said. "Financials," she said. "Mostly records of account transfers I wasn't told about. A file I found on his home computer showing the monitoring software and how long it had been running 14 months before I found it. Copies of communications between Daniel and his lawyer that I photographed with a camera he didn't know I had." She paused. "And records from the private investigator he hired to document my movements. Which is interesting because the investigator's records also document that I was at home alone every time Daniel told people I was somewhere else. It became evidence of a different kind than he intended," Jake said from the door. "Where is this evidence now?" "A safety deposit box," Emily said, "at a bank in Flagstaff. I drove there my second week here with cash. The box is in my name only." She looked at Jake. "A name that doesn't have his attached to it." A silence settled in the room. Victor looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not surprised Victor Blackwood did not do. Surprised it seemed, but something that was close to respect taken to its highest register. "You collected evidence while you were still living with him," he said. "For 11 months, she said, "starting the day I found the monitoring software." Jake made a sound that wasn't quite a word. She looked at him, and his expression was somewhere between impressed and something more careful. Something that looked like it hurt slightly. "That took a long time," he said quietly. "Living like that while you were doing it." "Yes," she said, and that was all because there wasn't more she could say about those 11 months that wouldn't take hours, and she didn't have hours, and also some of it she still couldn't put into words. Victor said, "Does he know about the safety deposit box?" "No," Emily said. "He doesn't know about the camera either. As far as Daniel knows, I ran with nothing because I had nothing. He believes I'm desperate and disorganized and completely without resources." She paused. "I've been very careful to let him believe that." Victor looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something she hadn't expected. "You've been running an operation," he said. She looked at him. "For 11 months inside that house," he said, "you ran a collection operation. You identified the target's blind spots. You exploited them consistently, without detection, and you extracted yourself with the assets when you were ready." He paused. "That's not what most people would do. Most people would have run the first week they understood what was happening." "I tried that," Emily said quietly. "The first time I understood what was happening, I told his lawyer I wanted to discuss a separation." She stopped. 3 days later, my sister got an anonymous call from someone who said she should ask me about the mental health evaluation Daniel had apparently requested from a private psychiatrist, a document that didn't exist until that phone call, and then it existed. She looked at the table. I understood then that I needed more than just myself believing me. I needed paperwork. The room was very quiet. Victor leaned back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then at Jake. Some of their silent language passed between them. Jake said, "The phone call to the bar. Someone is looking for you." "Yes," Emily said. "If they've traced the truck to Black Ridge, they know you were here," he said. "They may not know you're still here, but they'll assume you are unless they have a reason to think otherwise." "What kind of reason?" Emily said. Jake looked at Victor. Victor said, "Leave that to us." She didn't ask. She followed the second rule even now. But 3 days later, a rumor began circulating in the regional trucking network, the informal web of information that moved through diners and rest stops and the kind of small businesses that knew everyone's business, that a woman matching Emily's description had been seen hitching a ride east toward New Mexico. She didn't ask where the rumor came from. She understood that Jake Morrison had not spent 20 years as a security chief without knowing how information moved and how to move it differently. It bought them time. How much time, none of them could say. It was during those suspended weeks, the weeks of waiting, of not knowing how close Daniel's reach was extending, that the dynamic inside the bar shifted again. not dramatically. Nothing in this place happened dramatically in the open, she had learned that, but in the cumulative weight of small things. Carver stopped watching her with assessment eyes. He still watched. She didn't think Carver ever fully stopped watching anyone, but the quality of it changed. He started asking her opinion occasionally about logistical things, small operational questions, inventory, scheduling, the kind of questions that signal in any hierarchical environment that a person has been moved from the category of uncertain to the category of trusted. Trigger told her one afternoon, completely out of nowhere, that his late wife had been a hotel manager. Just that, just the one sentence, and then he picked up his whiskey and didn't say anything else. But she understood it as the single most personal thing he had ever volunteered to anyone in that bar, probably in years. She said, "She must have been good at her job." He said, "Best I ever saw." And that was the whole conversation. But it was a conversation which it hadn't been before. Even Bishop, who was generally so cheerful that she'd initially found him slightly unreal, had moments where he came to her with things that weren't cheerful. A situation with one of his construction workers, a family problem that was bleeding into the job. He didn't ask for advice exactly. He talked and she listened and she asked one or two questions, and that seemed to be what he needed. She had done this in hotels too, the guests who needed to tell someone something and just needed someone present enough to receive it. She was becoming, she realized with a feeling she couldn't entirely name, something like essential to this place. Not just the bar, not just the accounts, but the specific weave of the daily life here. And then on a Thursday morning, exactly 7 weeks after the phone call to the bar, a car pulled into the Iron Wolves parking lot that didn't belong there. Emily was behind the bar doing the morning inventory when Marcus came through the back. And even before he spoke, she could tell from his walk Marcus, who never hurried Marcus, who had the settled pace of a man who believed hurrying was mostly unnecessary, that something was wrong. "There's a man outside," Marcus said. "Expensive car, suit. He's got 2 other men with him." Emily's hand stopped on the inventory binder. She knew. She knew the way you know the sound of a specific person's footstep, the way you know certain voices before they speak a full word. She knew from the word expensive, and from the word suit, and from the particular way Marcus was standing, which was the way Marcus stood when he was managing his own reaction to something. "Okay," she said. Her voice was completely even. "Get Raven." "Already coming," Marcus said. She closed the inventory binder. She had 11 months of evidence in a safety deposit box in Flagstaff. She had the 3rd rule, don't lie to the people protecting you, and she had followed it. She had $43 the night she walked into this place, and now she had 6 weeks of wages and a mish and a room and something she hadn't had in years, which was a life she had built with her own hands. She had worked too hard for this. She had survived too much. She set the inventory binder on the shelf. She straightened her shirt. She took one steady breath, and then she walked out from behind the barn toward the front door. Victor materialized from the back corridor at the same moment, which she was certain was not coincidence. He moved with the unhurried authority of a man who intended to be seen and intended whoever was watching to understand what his presence meant. Jake came from somewhere else entirely. She didn't see where he was, simply not there, and then he was at her left shoulder, one step behind. She pushed open the front door. Daniel Cross was standing in the parking lot. He looked exactly the way she remembered him, and also simultaneously completely different. The same height, the same expensive suit that was casual enough to deny being a statement and formal enough to make one anyway. The same posture, the particular angle of his shoulders that she had once found reassuring and had slowly learned to read as the posture of a man who believed every room he walked into was already his. His face, when he saw her, rearranged itself instantly into the expression she recognized from 3 years of marriage, the concerned, warm, reasonable expression of a man whose wife was confused. He had 2 men with him that she didn't recognize. Not lawyers exactly, their build was wrong for lawyers, too much shoulder. But they were wearing suits, and they were standing slightly apart in the way of men who were maintaining professional deniability while being very much present. There were also 4 Iron Wolves members visible in the parking lot who had not been there when she'd arrived that morning. Daniel looked past her for just a moment, calculating, assessing, and then looked back at her face. "Emily," he said. His voice was warm. His voice was always warm. "Thank God, I've been so worried." She looked at him. This man This man who had read her texts and monitored her location and funneled her salary into accounts she didn't control, and told his friends she was fragile, and told her therapist, the therapist he had chosen and paid for, that he was concerned about her stability. "Daniel," she said. He took a step toward her. She did not step back. She felt at her left shoulder the quality of Jake's stillness, not threatening, not aggressive, but absolutely present the way a wall is present. Daniel stopped. He looked briefly at Jake, then at Victor, who had come to stand on the other side of the door, then at the four men in the parking lot. His expression flickered the first crack in the reasonable facade there and gone in half a second. "I just want to talk to my wife," Daniel said, redirecting to Emily, reloading the warmth. "Emily, I know you've been going through something. I know things have been hard. I'm not here to make this harder. I just want to take you home." "This is my home," Emily said. Something moved behind his eyes. "Sweetheart," he said, and the word landed like a small detonation, 3 years of being called that word in tones that were never quite right. "You're working in a bar in the middle of the Arizona desert. This isn't—" She said this is her home. Victor's voice came from the doorway behind her. Quiet, absolutely final. Daniel shifted his gaze to Victor. She watched him do the calculation, the age, the bearing, the leather vest, the patches, the men in the parking lot. She watched him decide with the specific arrogance of a man who has always had more money than whoever he's talking to, that this was a solvable problem. "I appreciate your concern," Daniel said to Victor with a smile that was meant to establish that he and Victor were in the same category of person and Emily was in a different category. "But this is a family matter." "My establishments are my business," Victor said. "The people who work in them are my business. You're on private property and you weren't invited." Daniel's smile didn't move. "I'm simply here to speak with my wife." "You keep calling her your wife," Jake said from Emily's left shoulder. His voice was quiet, even just information. "She hasn't used that name in 2 months." Daniel looked at Jake for the first time, a real look. The kind of look that was trying to read who this person was and what he represented. "And you are," Daniel said. "Nobody you need to know," Jake said. The two men in suits took a half step forward. Not aggressive, not yet, but positioning. Victor's hand did not move. None of the four men in the parking lot moved. But the atmosphere shifted the way pressure shifts before weather arrives. Emily said, "Daniel." He looked back at her, and for just a moment, for the first time since she had known him, she saw behind the reasonable expression to something else. Something that was not warm, not concerned, not the devoted husband arriving to rescue his confused wife. Something that was calculating and cold and very, very angry. She had seen that thing once before. Once early in the second year when she had refused something and hadn't fully understood yet what she was dealing with. She had never forgotten it. She was not afraid of it anymore. "You should leave," she said. "I'm not going with you. I'm not confused. I'm not unstable. And I'm not coming home because this is where I live now." "Emily," the warmth was thinning. "You don't understand what you're doing. There are legal matters, financial matters." "I know about the financial matters," she said. "I know all about them." He stopped. Something changed in his face. A question crossing it, a sudden sharp uncertainty that she had never seen there before. She watched him process her words. She watched him try to locate the Emily he had left behind, the woman whose confidence he had spent 3 years systematically reducing and failed to find her in the person standing in front of him. "What does that mean?" he said. His voice was different now. Quieter, no longer warm, just direct. "It means," Emily said, "that I've spent the last 2 months being very thoughtful about next steps." She held his gaze. "And I think you should talk to your lawyer before you do anything else." A long silence. Daniel looked at her. He looked at Jake. He looked at Victor. He looked at the parking lot. Then he said to the two men with him, "We're leaving." He turned toward the car. He opened the door. He got in. But just before the door closed, he said, and his voice was no longer reasonable, no longer warm, no longer performing for anyone, "This isn't over." The door closed. The car pulled out of the parking lot. Emily stood very still until the sound of the engine faded. Then her legs felt strange, and she would have sat down except that Victor was right there, and she was not going to sit down in front of Victor Blackwood if she could possibly help it. "You all right?" Jake said very quietly from exactly where he had been the entire time. "Yes," she said. She was also slightly shaking, and she suspected he could see that, and she also suspected he was not going to mention it. He did not mention it. Victor said, "Come inside." They went inside. Marcus materialized with coffee. Victor sat at his stool. Emily sat across from him, her hands wrapped around the cup, and breathed. "That went well," Victor said. She looked at him. "He left," Victor said. "He expected, I don't know what he expected. He expected to walk in and collect you. He didn't expect to walk into a place where you had people." He paused. "He's going to rethink his approach." "Yes," Emily said, "which means the next move will be different." "Yes," Emily said again. She had already been thinking about it. Daniel Cross did not have 3 years of marriage to her without developing a fairly accurate picture of how she thought. He knew she was organized. He now knew she had resources. He didn't know exactly what resources, but he knew she wasn't the scattered, desperate woman he'd been imagining. He was going to adjust. "He said legal matters," Jake said. He was sitting at the far end of the bar, and he had poured his own water this time, which she noticed even now as unusual. "What does he have legally?" "He'll try to move money," Emily said. "He'll try to establish that I abandoned the marriage, which I did technically, but the grounds matter, and he knows I know that. He'll try to—" She stopped. "He has a psychiatrist who will say whatever he's paid to say. He's done it before." She looked at her coffee cup. "What he doesn't know is that I have a different psychiatrist who has seen me regularly for 8 months, paid for in cash, not Daniel's choice." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You were building a case." "I was building a case," she confirmed, "since before you left." "Since the month I found the monitoring software," she said. 11 months ago." Another silence. Victor said, "You're going to need a lawyer." "I know," Emily said. "I have one. She's in Phoenix. I've been in contact since the 3rd week I was here." She looked at Victor. "I didn't mention it because it was personal business." He nodded as if this was exactly the right answer. Jake said, "What does your lawyer say about the evidence you have?" "She says it's strong," Emily said. "The financial manipulation documentation is particularly strong because it spans 3 years and shows a consistent pattern. The psychiatrist report he commissioned, the one that doesn't accurately describe me, is actually useful to us because we can demonstrate that it was generated in direct response to my first attempt to discuss separation, which establishes intent." She paused. "She says the harder part will be the timeline. This is going to take time. Legal things always take time, and Daniel has resources to make it take longer." "Does he have enough to make it go away?" Victor asked. Emily met his eyes. "No," she said, "not with what I have." Victor studied her for a moment. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," she said. "The reason I waited 11 months was because I needed to be sure." He nodded once, that definitive nod that meant he had made a decision. "Then we wait for his next move," he said. "And in the meantime, nothing changes here. You work, you live here. Nobody in this club discusses your situation with outsiders, which goes without saying, but I'm saying it." He looked at the bar as a whole, even though the only people present were her and Jake and Marcus. "And if anyone connected to that man comes near this place again, they go through me first." Emily looked at him. She had an odd sensation in her chest, the particular feeling she would think later of someone who has been carrying an enormous weight for so long that they have stopped noticing the weight, and then someone helps them set it down, and the absence of it is almost louder than the thing itself. "Victor?" she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Thank you," she said. He made a sound that was not quite dismissive and not quite accepting, and was entirely Victor. "Back to work," he said. She went back to work. For the next 10 days, nothing happened. This was in certain ways worse than something happening. Daniel's silence had a quality to it, a deliberateness, the particular quiet of someone who has gone away to think harder. She felt it in her sleep in the minutes before the bar opened, in the pauses between customers. Jake felt it, too, she could tell. He was in the bar more than usual. Not hovering, Jake Morrison did not hover. It was not in his nature, but more present, more consistent. She started to understand that this was how he operated under heightened conditions, not with more visible reaction, but with more complete coverage. On the 4th day of the silence, he asked her something she hadn't expected. "Do you have a phone yet?" She looked up from the account she was reviewing. "Prepaid," she said, "from the gas station. Cash." "I want you to add a number," he said. He said a number. She wrote it on the inside cover of the account's notebook. Not his name, just the number, because she understood without being told that writing his name was the kind of thing that could become a problem if someone was looking. That's my direct number, he said. Not the club line, my number. If anything happens when I'm not here, or if you see anything that doesn't feel right, not dangerous, just doesn't feel right, you call that. She looked at the number. Okay, she said. You'll actually call it, he said. He said it without inflection, but she heard the question underneath, which was not, will you remember the number? But are you the kind of person who will ask for help when you need it? Or will you try to handle everything alone until it's too late? She thought about 11 months of handling everything alone. She thought about how well that had worked and how much it had cost. I'll call it, she said. He nodded. She went back to the accounts. But the number stayed in her mind that whole afternoon with a weight that was disproportionate to what it was, which was on the surface simply practical. An emergency contact, a professional courtesy from a security chief to a person in a complicated situation. Except that Jake Morrison had worked for this club for a long time, and she strongly suspected he had never given his direct number to a bartender before. On the 7th day of Daniel's silence, Emily's lawyer called. She took the call and her room door closed, voice low, and what her lawyer told her shifted the ground under everything. Daniel had filed first. He had gone to a Nevada court and filed a complaint alleging that Emily had abandoned the marriage-taken property, specifically the truck, which was in his name and was believed to be in a compromised mental state. He had submitted the psychiatric evaluation. He had submitted documentation showing Emily's withdrawal of cash from grocery runs over 2 months amounts, so small they hadn't registered to her as significant as evidence of financial misconduct. He had submitted cell tower data from her old phone, placing her in Black Ridge, Arizona. He knew exactly where she was. He had known before he walked into that parking lot. The parking lot confrontation hadn't been his move. It had been reconnaissance. Her lawyer said, "We need to respond within 30 days. The good news is that a Nevada filing gives us jurisdiction to counterfile with everything you've given me. The better news is that his psychiatric evaluation has a date problem. It was commissioned 9 months ago, but was never filed until now, which we can use to demonstrate it was generated as a legal weapon rather than a medical finding." She paused. "The complicated news is that he is specifically seeking to have your access to the safety deposit box frozen pending the divorce proceedings." Emily sat very still on the edge of her cot. "Can he do that?" she said. "He's trying to," her lawyer said. "The argument is that the box contains joint marital property, which is not accurate based on how you opened it, but a judge would need to make that determination. And in the meantime, depending on the judge, there could be a temporary freeze while the determination is made." "How long would that take?" Emily said. "If it goes through quickly, 2 weeks. If it doesn't go quickly." "If it doesn't go quickly," Emily said, "he has more time to build a counter-narrative with resources I don't have." "Yes," her lawyer said. A silence. "Okay," Emily said. "What do we do?" Her lawyer walked her through it. She listened to every word and asked 3 specific questions, and when the call ended, she sat on the cot for exactly 2 minutes, just 2 minutes, which was what she allowed herself. Then she stood up and walked back into the bar. Jake was there. He looked at her face the moment she came through the door, and she watched him read whatever was on it with that particular precision of his, and she watched his expression become very careful and very attentive. She walked to the end of the bar. She put her hands flat on the counter. "He filed in Nevada," she said quietly. "He's trying to freeze my evidence." Jake's jaw tightened. One single visible tell, one moment of genuine reaction, and then his face was even again. "Can he?" said. "My lawyer says it depends on the judge and the timeline," Emily said. "She's working on a counter filing. But if he gets a temporary freeze before we can respond..." She stopped. She made herself finish it. "If he gets a freeze, the documents stay in the box. They're inaccessible to me. And everything I built those 11 months for becomes temporarily unavailable exactly when I need it most." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What does your lawyer need from you right now?" "She already has everything I gave her," Emily said. "The question is speed. She needs to file before he gets the freeze ordered." "What's her timeline?" "She thinks she can file within 10 days, Emily said. "His freeze request will take at minimum 2 weeks to get before a judge, more likely 3, because it's a property dispute, and Nevada courts are backed up." She paused. "So we're ahead of it." "Barely." Jake nodded slowly. Then he said, "Is there anything else in that box that isn't in what you gave her?" She thought about it. "There's a series of photographs," she said. of physical documentation I photographed from Daniel's home office. Some of it I gave her. Some of it I held back because I wasn't sure if it was relevant. What's in the part you held back? She looked at him. Communications between Daniel and a county commissioner in Nevada about a land development deal. The timing of those communications is complicated. She paused carefully. In ways that probably have nothing to do with my divorce case and everything to do with why Daniel is particularly motivated to make sure I don't have a platform to be publicly credible. Jake's eyes were very steady on her. He's not just trying to get you back, Jake said. It wasn't a question. He never was, Emily said. He's trying to make sure nothing I might say is believable. She looked at her hands on the bar. A confused, unstable woman who ran from her marriage and went to work in a biker bar in the desert is not a credible person. That's what this is about. It's not about me. It's about what I know. The bar was quiet around them. Mid-afternoon, only a handful of people present, nobody close enough to hear. Jake said very quietly, "How much does your lawyer know about the commissioner communications?" "I told her they exist," Emily said. "I didn't give her the photographs. I wasn't sure who I could trust with that information." "Can you trust her with it?" She thought about her lawyer, a woman in Phoenix who had been handling domestic abuse and financial manipulation cases for 18 years, and who had said on their first phone call, without any prompting, "I've dealt with men like this before, and I want you to know that what you've built here is more than enough. We just need to be methodical," and felt the same certainty she had felt then. "Yes," Emily said. "Then give it to her," Jake said. "All of it. Don't manage the information anymore. Your lawyer needs the full picture." She looked at him. "You're right," she said. "I know," he said. And then before she could respond to that, "Call her back today." She called her lawyer back within the hour. The shift in the conversation was immediate. Her lawyer was quiet for a long moment after Emily described the commissioner communications, and then she said in a different tone than she had used before, quieter, more deliberate, "Emily, I need you to understand something. If what you're describing is accurate, and if those photographs are what you think they are, then what we have is not just a strong divorce case. What we have is something that Daniel Cross cannot afford to have in any public proceeding." "I know," Emily said, which means her lawyer said carefully that the divorce case may become leverage. Not your choice to use it as leverage, his necessity to settle before it becomes that. Emily sat with that for a moment. "He'll want to make this go away," she said. "If he's smart," her lawyer said. "And I think you've told me enough about this man to know that he is smart. He will want this settled as quietly and completely as possible, which changes our position significantly." A pause. "This is good, Emily. This is actually very good." After she hung up, Emily went to the bathroom, ran cold water over her wrists the way she did when she needed to reset, and looked at herself in the mirror for a moment. She had walked into this place with $43 in an inventory binder. She had done the work. She had followed the rules. She had told the truth to the people protecting her even when it was terrifying to do so. She had built day by day and choice by choice a position that was almost strong enough. Almost. She dried her hands. She went back to the bar. That evening was normal on the surface, the usual crowd, the usual rhythms, the jukebox cycling through its rotation. She moved through the shift with the efficiency she had developed over 2 months reading the room, anticipating needs, managing the flow of the space with the particular competence that she had come to understand was one of the things that had changed how people here saw her. But underneath her mind was running the scenario. Daniel's timeline, her lawyer's timeline, the photographs in the safety deposit box and what they meant, the commissioner whose name appeared in those communications and what it would mean for him if they became public. She was so deep in it that she almost missed the moment when the door opened and Daniel Cross walked back in. Not with the suit this time, not with the 2 men in professional clothes. He was alone, dressed casually, looking for all the world like a man who had simply decided to stop in for a drink, and the performance was so complete and so confident that for one disorienting second she nearly accepted the fiction of it. Then her eyes focused and her mind caught up, and she stood very still behind the bar and did not reach for the phone in her pocket and did not look toward Jake's stool, because doing either of those things would tell Daniel something he didn't need to know. He sat down at the bar, right across from her. He looked at her for a moment, then he said conversationally, pleasantly, as if they were two people who had simply not seen each other recently, "I'd like a drink." She looked at him. Every calculation she had made in 11 months, every document, every carefully managed step. This man sitting across from her in the place that had become her home, ordering a drink with the easy confidence of someone who believed that the situation was still fundamentally his. She reached under the bar. She poured a glass of water. She set it in front of him. "We don't serve people who harass our employees," she said. Her voice was completely level. He looked at the water glass. He looked at her. His face did several things in a very short time: surprise, recalculation, controlled anger. "Emily," he said low, "I need you to understand what I can do, what I'm willing to." "Daniel." She kept her voice even, kept her posture straight, kept her eyes on his face with the steadiness of a woman who had spent 2 months in this place, learning exactly what she was capable of. "You should talk to your lawyer." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw it happen. The thing she had never seen in 3 years of marriage. The real calculation, the honest assessment, the moment when Daniel Cross looked at her and understood that the woman standing across from him was not the woman he had left behind in Nevada, was not confused, was not without resources, was not manageable. She saw him understand that he had made an enormous mistake. He stood up. He smoothed his jacket. He said very quietly, "This isn't who you are." "You're wrong," she said. "This is exactly who I am. You just never paid enough attention to know it." He left without another word. Jake appeared beside her from wherever Jake always materialized from, and he didn't say anything and she didn't say anything, and for a moment they just stood there, two people who had both been in enough difficult rooms to know when something important had just shifted. Then Jake said very quietly, "You good?" "I'm good," she said, and for the first time since she had looked in that mirror with the cold water on her wrists, she actually believed it. Daniel Cross left Black Ridge that night, and Emily watched his taillights disappear from the front window of Iron Wolf's bar, with her hands completely still at her sides and her mind running at full speed. She knew him. That was the thing nobody on the outside fully understood. She knew him better than anyone, better probably than he knew himself, because she had spent 3 years in close proximity to the specific machinery of how he thought. And what she knew standing at that window was that Daniel walking away without escalating was not Daniel accepting defeat. It was Daniel changing tactics. She turned away from the window. Jake was behind her, and Victor had come out from the back office, drawn by whatever internal radar he seemed to have for situations that required his presence. Carver was at a table near the door. Marcus was behind the bar. The room had the specific quality of a held breath. "He'll go legal now," Emily said. "Full force, no more personal visits. He'll let the lawyers and the court filings do the work." She looked at Victor. "He knows I have something. He doesn't know exactly what, but he knows the threat is real now, which makes him more dangerous, not less." Victor said, "Your lawyer." "She's filing within the week," Emily said. "I called her this afternoon with the rest of the information. The additional photographs." She paused. "She says it changes the position." Victor looked at her for a moment. "How much does the commissioner situation complicate things?" "Significantly," Emily said. "For Daniel, not for me." "If it becomes public," Victor said carefully, "things tend to move in unpredictable directions." "I know," Emily said. "My lawyer is being strategic about that. The photographs exist. She knows they exist. Daniel's lawyer will have to anticipate that we have leverage we haven't deployed yet." She met Victor's eyes. "The goal is settlement, not public exposure. Settled quietly, completely, in a way that ends it permanently." Victor was quiet for a moment. "Then what do you need from us?" She had been thinking about this. "Nothing more than you have already given me," she said. "A place to be, people around me. I need to let the legal process work." She paused. "But I want to be honest with you. If he escalates in ways I can't predict, it could create problems for the club. I want you to know that so you can make informed decisions." Victor made a sound in the back of his throat that she had come to recognize as his version of dismissal. Not of her, but of the concerns she'd raised. "The problems Daniel Cross could bring to this club," he said, "are not problems we haven't handled before." He stood. "You said your lawyer is filing this week. Then we wait this week out." He went back to his office. Carver from his table near the door said, without looking up from his drink, "He's not coming back in here. I'll tell you that right now." It wasn't directed at anyone specifically, but Emily heard it and understood what it meant, which was that Carver, who had spent weeks measuring her, assessing her, watching her from behind suspicious eyes, had made his decision. and his decision was here. She went back to work. The week that followed was the strangest week of her 2 months in Black Ridge, because on the surface it was entirely ordinary, and underneath it was anything but. She worked her shifts, she managed the accounts, she trained Carmen on the closing procedures, which Carmen was picking up faster than expected. She had 2 more calls with her lawyer, and each call was tighter, more specific, more focused on exact language and exact timing. On Wednesday, her lawyer filed the counter petition in Nevada Family Court. On Thursday, she told Victor. He said, "Good." He said nothing else, and she appreciated that more than any extended conversation would have been. On Friday, her lawyer called to say that Daniel's attorney had requested a phone conference for the following Monday. This was, her lawyer said, a significant signal. Daniel's attorneys didn't request conferences to fight harder. They requested conferences when they had been told by their client to find a path to resolution. "He wants to settle," Emily said. "I believe so," her lawyer said. "But he wants to settle on terms that still give him something. Control of the narrative, probably. Which means the conversation Monday is going to be about what you're willing to trade for what." Emily already knew the answer to that. She had known it since the afternoon she sat in her room thinking through the evidence and what it meant. "I want my financial independence restored," she said. "Full and complete, every account, every asset that was mine before the marriage, plus a settlement that reflects 3 years of his use of my professional capacity to serve his interests while systematically limiting mine." She paused. "And I want a permanent agreement that he will not attempt to use the psychiatric evaluation or any other document generated during our marriage to impugn my credibility in any future context." Her lawyer was quiet for a moment. "That's a strong ask," she said. "Not unreasonable, but strong." "Good," Emily said. She hung up and went back to the bar where it was a Friday evening and the crowd was building toward its weekly peak. She moved through the shift with the particular focus that had become her baseline, always aware, always anticipating, always 1/2 step ahead of what the room needed. Around 9 o'clock, Victor appeared at the bar and sat across from her. He didn't order anything. He just sat and watched her work for a few minutes, which she had come to understand was a specific behavior of his, a kind of assessment that wasn't critical but was very attentive. She came back to him between orders. "You look different," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Then when you came in," he said. "2 months ago." He considered. "Not just more comfortable, something else." "Less scared," she offered. "No," he said. He thought about it for a moment. "You weren't scared when you came in. That's what got my attention." He looked at her. "What's different is that now you know it." She stood with that for a moment. "Then know what?" "That you're not scared," he said. "There's a difference between not feeling fear and knowing you're not afraid. 2 months ago, you didn't feel fear because you'd already seen the worst. Now you don't feel fear because you've built something." He paused. "That's a different thing entirely." She looked at him. Victor Blackwood, who ran a motorcycle club in a desert town in Arizona and had spent 22 years warning his people about dangerous things, who had given her a 3-day trial and a set of rules and trusted her with the accounts of struggling, legitimate businesses, and had said, when Daniel Cross walked into his parking lot, "The people who work here are my business," without hesitation, without calculation, without asking what it would cost him. "Victor," she said, "why did you actually give me the job?" He looked at her steadily. "Because you asked where the inventory list was," he said, "not where the exit was, not whether I was dangerous. You came in with nothing and your first question was about the work." He paused. "I've been in situations where I had nothing. You don't forget how to recognize someone else in that place." She didn't have an answer to that didn't involve more emotion than she was prepared to show behind the bar on a Friday night. So she nodded and moved to the next customer and felt something settle in her chest with a permanence that was new. The Monday call happened exactly as her lawyer had predicted. Daniel's attorney opened with language about both parties' interest in resolving the matter efficiently, which was lawyer for, "We want out of this as much as you do." Her lawyer's counterpart was measured and professional, and the conversation that followed was structured and formal. But Emily, listening on the call from her room with her door closed and a notepad on her knee, could hear underneath the formal language the specific sound of a negotiation being conducted by people who understood where the leverage was. Daniel's attorney proposed restoration of Emily's premarital financial assets, plus a settlement figure that was considerably lower than what Emily's lawyer had indicated they would seek. He proposed a mutual non-disclosure agreement covering the contents of the safety deposit box. Emily's lawyer declined the settlement figure in the terms of the non-disclosure. Daniel's attorney asked for a recess. The call resumed 40 minutes later with a higher number and adjusted ND, a language that was, her lawyer said afterward, much closer to acceptable. They did not settle Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday. They settled Thursday morning at 10:47 in a formal agreement that Emily signed electronically from her room in the back of Iron Wolf's bar, with the sound of Carmen doing the morning stock count coming through the door. She read every word before she signed it. When it was done, her lawyer said, "It's over, Emily. He can't touch you anymore." Emily sat very still. She had imagined this moment many times over 11 months of building toward it. She had imagined feeling something enormous relief, like a physical release, or the specific satisfaction of a completed thing. What she actually felt was quieter than that, deeper than that, less like an ending and more like the first real breath after a very long time of breathing shallowly. "Thank you," she said. "You did this," her lawyer said. "I want to be clear about that. The evidence you built, the patience you had, the choices you made, that's why we're here." She thanked her again and hung up. She sat on the edge of the cot for a moment, same cot she had slept on for 2 months. The room was exactly the same as it had been the first night she lay down in her wet clothes and let herself breathe. She was not the same. She stood up. She straightened her shirt. She went out into the bar. Victor was already there at his stool. She understood with the particular clarity of a moment that would stay with her for a long time that Marcus had probably told him she'd been in her room all morning with the door closed, and that Victor had positioned himself where he would be visible when she came out. She walked to the bar and stood across from him. "It's settled," she said. He looked at her. Completely, she said. "Full financial restoration, settlement, permanent agreement." She paused. "He can't use anything against me anymore." Victor was quiet for a moment. He picked up his glass of water and turned it slightly in his hand the way he did when he was thinking. Then he said, "How do you feel?" It was the first time he had asked her that. Not how is the situation or what are the terms, but how do you feel, the simple, direct question of a person who actually wanted to know the answer. She thought about it honestly. "Like I haven't slept in 11 months and I just sat down for the first time," she said. He nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "That's what it should feel like." She went to find Jake. He wasn't in the bar, which was unusual enough for morning that she noticed it immediately. She found him in the back parking lot working on his bike, which she now knew was what he did when he needed to think with his hands. He looked up when she came out. She said, "It's settled." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face, not surprise, but the quiet release of tension that had been held for weeks, the specific feeling of a person who has been alert to danger and is being told they can stand down. "Everything," he said. "Everything," she said. He set down whatever he was holding. He looked at her for a moment with those gray eyes. "You okay?" he said. "Yes," she said. And then because it was Jake and she had been honest with him from the beginning, "I don't know exactly what okay feels like yet, but I think I'm getting there." He nodded. He didn't try to fill the moment with more words than it needed, which was one of the things she had come to value most about him. He understood that not every important moment needed to be spoken into the ground. "Good," he said, and then, "I'm glad." Simple, direct, completely genuine. It was, she thought, the most Jake Morrison sentence she had ever heard. She went back inside. The celebration, if it could be called that, because celebrations at Iron Wolf's bar had a particular low-key quality that she had come to find more genuine than any formal occasion, happened that evening without anyone planning it. Word traveled through the room the way everything traveled in this place, through the particular channels of a community that communicated mostly in what was not said. By 6 o'clock, people who were usually quiet were slightly less so. Deke bought a round for the immediate area around the bar, which was his version of a toast. Trigger, who she had never seen do anything spontaneous, set $20 on the bar and said without explanation or preamble, "For whatever you want." Bishop walked in an hour later and seemed to understand immediately what was being marked, and he shook her hand across the bar with both of his and said, "You did good, Emily." And the warmth in his voice was so uncomplicated and complete that she had to look away for a second. Carver came to the bar at some point in the evening. She didn't notice exactly when because the night had a slightly dreamlike quality to it, the specific dream of a person who had achieved something they weren't sure they would achieve. He sat across from her and said without preamble, "You know what I was thinking that first week you were here? That I was going to be a problem," Emily said. He looked at her for a beat. "I was thinking," he said, "that you reminded me of my daughter." He picked up his drink. "She had that same thing you have. That same not toughness exactly." "Toughness isn't the right word. More like determination," Emily offered. "Yeah," Carver said. "Yeah, determination." He was quiet for a moment. "She's in Denver. Does very well for herself." He took a drink. "Point is, I was wrong about you being a problem. You're not a problem." He set the glass down. "You're the opposite of a problem. I want you to know I know that." Coming from Carver, this was roughly equivalent to a standing ovation. "Thank you, Carver," she said. He made a sound that wasn't quite acknowledgement and went back to his drink, and the conversation was over, which was exactly right. Victor left around midnight, which was earlier than usual. When he passed the bar, he stopped and looked at her and said, as if he was continuing a conversation they had been having, rather than starting a new one, "I'd like you to think about a different arrangement." She waited. "Not the bar," he said, "or not only the bar. I want to talk to you about taking on the management of Ridge Materials. Properly. Full oversight, decision-making authority, the ability to restructure the way you've been recommending." He paused. "It's a legitimate business. It needs a legitimate manager. You've been telling me what's wrong with it for 2 months. I'd like you to fix it." She stared at him. "Victor," she said, "that's a significant offer," he said. "I know, think about it." He moved toward the door. "We'll talk numbers when you're ready." He left. She stood behind the bar and thought about it for approximately 30 seconds. She already knew what her answer was. The weeks that followed had a different quality from anything that had come before. The hypervigilance that had been her baseline for months, the constant low-grade alertness, the watching of doors, the reading of every approaching presence for threat, didn't disappear overnight. She had expected it to in some optimistic version of how resolution was supposed to feel, and when it didn't, she was briefly confused, and then remembering what she knew about how human minds actually worked, she was not. You didn't simply stop being alert after years of needing to be alert. The body took time to believe what the situation knew. But it diminished, gradually, unevenly, in the way that real things always change. She started sleeping differently, not all at once, not dramatically, but she stopped waking at 3 in the morning for reasons she couldn't identify. She stopped cataloging exits. She stopped keeping her room key in her front pocket at all times instead of her bag. She said yes to Ridge Materials. The conversation with Victor was businesslike and direct and covered territory she had already mapped in her head from 2 months of looking at the accounts. She had questions and he had answers, and the ones he didn't have answers to, they agreed to find together. He gave her a salary that was more than she had made as a general manager in Reno. She did not allow herself to react to that number in front of him, but that evening alone in her room, she sat on the edge of her cot and looked at the figure written on the notepad and felt something specific and private and enormous. She was going to be okay. Not eventually, not theoretically, actually concretely right now, she was going to be okay. Carmen took over the primary bar shifts with Emily moving to mornings and oversight. The transition was clean because Emily had been training Carmen for it without quite admitting that's what she was doing. Carmen was 24 and quick and had the particular quality of someone who absorbed information best when it was given to them in the form of trust rather than instruction. Emily gave her the responsibility first and the explicit guidance second, which was backwards from most management approaches and exactly right for Carmen. On Carmen's first fully independent shift, she handled a difficult situation at the corner table with the same smooth, preemptive move Emily had made in her first week, producing the right solution before the problem fully formed. Emily, watching from the end of the bar, where she was reviewing Ridge Materials invoices, felt something she identified after a moment as pride. Clean, uncomplicated pride in someone else's competence. She hadn't felt that in years. Daniel had not liked her to be proud of other people. He had experienced her admiration for anyone other than him as a kind of theft. She was going to enjoy getting that back. The Ridge Materials work was consuming in the best way. The way that work is consuming when it is the right work, when the fit between the task and the person doing it has that particular quality of alignment that makes 8 hours feel like 3. She spent the first 2 weeks doing what she called a full audit in her mind, meaning she looked at every process, every contract, every staff arrangement, every vendor relationship without yet changing anything, building the complete picture before she touched it. The staff were for the most part good people who had been managed poorly. This was almost always the problem. She had found not bad people but misaligned systems, unclear expectations, the particular demoralization that sets in when people aren't given the tools to do their jobs well and are blamed for the results anyway. She recognized it because she had been on both sides of it. She started with the simplest things: clear job descriptions, consistent communication about expectations, a weekly meeting that is actually used for information exchange rather than performance. The staff response was immediate, invisible, not because the changes were dramatic, but because consistency itself is its own form of respect, and people who have been without it notice its arrival immediately. Victor sat in on the first staff meeting. He didn't say a word the entire time. He watched Emily run it with the same quality of attention he had given her from the first night in the bar. At the end, walking out, he said to her, "Two of those people were going to quit before the end of the month." "I know," Emily said. "Jorge and the woman from the delivery team." Victor looked at her. "You knew." They had the particular quality of people who have made a decision and are just waiting for the right moment, she said. "I've seen it before. The meeting didn't fix whatever brought them there, but it told them there's a reason to wait and see." He walked with her for a few steps. "When I was 20, and he said, I was managing that motel I told you Deke mentioned. There was a woman on staff. She was 60-something. She had been making beds in that place for 15 years. I came in full of ideas about efficiency, and I spent my first week telling everybody what was wrong." He paused. "She came to me at the end of the week, and she said, and I have not forgotten this in 35 years, she said, 'Son, before you can change anything, you have to understand why it is the way it is.'" He paused again. "I didn't listen to her the first time. Took me about 2 more months and 3 people quitting to understand she was right." Emily thought about in the Ridge Materials accounts binder the weeks she had spent looking before she touched anything. "I learned that lesson too," she said, "the hard way." "Most important lessons come that way," Victor said. And that was the end of the conversation, but it sat with her for days. The month that followed was the first month in 3 years that felt entirely like her own. And somewhere in the middle of it, something shifted between her and Jake that she had been aware of for weeks and had been carefully not examining, because examining it felt like touching something she wasn't sure she was ready to trust. It started, or rather it became undeniable on a Tuesday evening when the bar was quiet and he was at his usual stool, and she was reviewing invoices at the end of the counter, and neither of them was saying anything, and she realized with the particular jolt of a perception that arrives late but arrives fully formed that this silence had been comfortable for a very long time. Not empty, not the silence of people who have run out of things to say. The silence of people who have been in enough real conversations with each other that they don't need every moment to be filled. She looked up from the invoice. He was already looking at her, not with the alert, assessing quality of a security chief monitoring a situation. Just looking, the way people look at things they have spent a long time being around and have stopped pretending not to care about. She said, "How long have you been in Black Ridge?" He looked slightly surprised by the question, not much but enough to notice. 12 years, he said, and before that, Columbus, he said, for a while. Before that, he paused. Different places. I moved around a lot in my 20s. What brought you here? He was quiet for a moment. I was in a bad place, he said. Not a geographic bad place. The other kind. He looked at his water glass. Victor found me at a moment where the options were narrow, and he gave me a different option. He paused. That was 12 years ago. She understood without asking what that meant. Victor's habit of seeing people at the exact moment they needed to be seen and offering something they hadn't expected was apparently not new and was apparently not limited to her. He collects people, she said. Jake looked at her. A corner of his mouth moved. He hates that framing. I know, she said. I said it once and he gave me a look that could have stopped traffic. She paused. But it's accurate. It is, Jake agreed. He was quiet for a moment. Then he's been doing it his whole life. There are people in this club who would have gone a completely different direction without him. Worse directions. He picked up his water glass. He doesn't see it that way. He says he just hires competent people. He hired me after a 3-day trial, Emily said. I arrived in the rain with $43. And you asked about the inventory list, Jake said. She looked at him. He told you that? First week you were here, Jake said. He said. He paused and something in his expression shifted, became careful in a way that meant he was deciding how much to give. He said, this one's different. Watch her. He looked at her directly. I would have watched you anyway. The bar was very quiet. She held his gaze for a moment. Jake, she said, can I ask you something personal? He waited. Have you ever been in a situation like mine? She said. Not the same, but cornered, no good options, running from something. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she started to think she had overstepped. Then he said, yes, just the one word, but the weight behind it was enormous. Did it get better? She said. He looked at her. I'm here, aren't I? He said. It was not quite an answer, and also entirely an answer. She nodded and went back to her invoices. But for the rest of that evening, something between them had a slightly different texture, not more tense, just more honest. Like a door that had been sitting at a specific angle for months had moved a few more degrees open. 3 days later, he asked her to have dinner with him. Not in the bar, not in the way of a professional conversation about club business or security or the Ridge Materials accounts. He came to the bar in the late afternoon on a Friday when Carmen was handling the shift, and he stood across the counter from Emily, who was reviewing paperwork, and he said, there's a place in town, not much, just the diner, but the food's actually good. Would you want to have dinner there tonight? She looked up. He was holding his expression carefully, and she recognized that because she had been holding her own expression carefully for weeks too. And the recognition of it, the fact that this composed, controlled, watchful man was being careful about his face around her, told her something more important than the question itself. Yes, she said. He nodded. 7 o'clock, he said. And then he left, which was exactly right, because there was nothing else to say, and adding more would have made it into something it didn't need to be yet. At 7 o'clock, they sat across from each other in a booth at the Black Ridge Diner and talked for 3 hours. Not about the club, not about Daniel, not about the legal settlement or the Ridge Materials accounts, or any of the things that had constituted their conversations for months. They talked about Columbus, Ohio, where they had both spent time without ever crossing paths, which was the kind of thing that would have seemed like coincidence 3 months ago and felt now like something else. They talked about what she had wanted to do before hotel management. She had briefly seriously considered architecture, a fact she hadn't told anyone in years, and about what he had studied, before everything had gone sideways in his 20s, which was criminal justice, which made her laugh, because of course it was. He laughed too. She hadn't heard him laugh before. It was an unexpectedly warm sound, a real one. Nothing performed about it. When they walked back from the diner to Iron Wolf's bar, the night air was the particular dry cool of the desert after dark, and they were side by side at the natural distance that had closed over the past months, without either of them formally acknowledging it. He stopped at the door. She looked at him. He said, I want to say something, and I want to say it right. He took a breath. You've been through something that would have ended most people. You came in here with nothing, and you built something completely real. That's not because of Raven or this club or me. That's you. He held her gaze. I want to be around you. Not because you need looking after, you don't, and you haven't from the beginning, but because I want to. He paused. Is that okay? She looked at him for a moment. This man who had watched over her from a stool at the end of a bar, without ever making it a debt, who had given her his direct number and asked if she would actually call it, who had said, I'm sorry, that's true, when she told him she had survived something worse. 3 clean words that had cracked something open in her that had been sealed for years. Yes, she said, that's okay. He nodded once, and then he smiled, not the corner of the mouth movement she had cataloged over months of observation, but an actual smile, the unguarded kind, and she felt it land somewhere in her chest with a warmth that was entirely new, and also she realized had been building for a very long time. She went inside. She sat on the edge of the cot that night and looked at the room around her, the narrow space with the 3-drawer dresser, the window looking out on the parking lot, the shelf where she had put the one photograph she had brought with her, a picture of herself at 22, that she had chosen specifically because it was from before Daniel, from when she still knew who she was. She looked at that photograph for a long moment. She looked like that woman again, she thought. Not exactly you couldn't survive. What she had survived and come out exactly the same, but something essential, something where she thought about what Victor had said, the difference between not feeling fear and knowing you aren't afraid. She thought about $43 in an inventory list and 3 rules. She thought about a man at the end of a bar with gray eyes and water he hadn't ordered. And she thought this is what it feels like to have built something, not been given something, not rescued, not handed a life by someone else's mercy. Built. With her own hands, her own mind, her own choices, one careful day at a time in the most unlikely place, surrounded by the most unlikely people who had turned out to be exactly the right ones. Outside Black Ridge was settling into night. The bar had gone quiet. The desert was doing what deserts do, holding its enormous silence around everything indifferent and ancient, and somehow in this particular moment, exactly right. Emily Carter lay down on her cot. She closed her eyes. She slept without waking until morning. The morning after she slept through until dawn for the first time in 3 years, Emily Carter woke up and made a decision that had nothing to do with survival. That was the difference. That was the thing she noticed first before she was fully awake, before she had done anything except open her eyes and lie there in the narrow room, listening to Black Ridge coming alive outside the window. Every decision she had made for the past year, every careful, methodical, documented choice had been made in service of getting out, getting safe, getting free. The whole architecture of her thinking had been built around a single question: how do I survive this? She didn't have to ask that question anymore. And in the space where that question used to live, something else was growing, something quieter and more permanent. Not what do I need to survive, but what do I actually want to build? She sat up. She pulled out the notepad she kept on the small dresser. She started writing, not accounts, not Ridge materials projections, not legal notes. She wrote down everything she knew about what happened to women when they left situations like hers. Not from research from herself, from the specific texture of those 11 months of building evidence while living inside the thing she was building evidence against. From the particular kind of thinking you develop when you are planning your own escape with no outside help, when the entire weight of the operation rests on you alone, in a house with a man who is convinced most of the people around you that you are the problem. She wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. When she was done, she looked at what she had written. She realized the outline of a program. She brought it to Victor 3 days later. Not impulsively, she spent those 3 days refining it, tightening it, applying the same methodical thinking she had applied to the Ridge materials accounts, in the bar inventory, and every other problem she had encountered since arriving in Black Ridge. She approached it the way she approached everything: understand the full shape of it first, then present it when it was ready. She set the notepad on the desk in front of him. He read it carefully. He read it the way he read everything, completely, without rushing, with the kind of attention that meant he was actually processing rather than skimming. When he was done, he set the notepad down. He said, "You want to run a support program out of this club's facilities." "Not out of the bar," Emily said. "Out of the community space. The back building that's been empty since you moved the club's storage to the Ridge Materials warehouse." She paused. "It has its own entrance. It's separate from the club's operations. I've looked at the square footage. It works." Victor looked at the notepad again. "For women leaving abusive situations. Specifically, women in the early stages," Emily said. "The stage I was in when I got here. When you have nothing and you don't know what your legal options are, and you can't see past the next 24 hours. She looked at him. "I know exactly what that stage feels like. I know what those women need because I needed it. Not a shelter. There are shelters. The system handles that part badly, but it handles it. What's missing is the part before the shelter. The planning, the evidence, the legal foundations before the crisis becomes so acute that all you can do is run." Victor was quiet for a long time. "This brings a particular kind of attention into a club that has particular reasons to manage its visibility," he said. Not as an objection, as a fact that needed to be named. "I know," Emily said. "I thought about that. The program would be structured as a standalone nonprofit, completely separate legal entity. No club branding, no club name. The connection to this building would be a property arrangement, a lease. Standard." She paused. The club would have a complete deniability if the optics ever became a problem. Victor said, "I'm not interested in deniability." She looked at him. "If we do something," he said, "we do it. We don't hide from it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm thinking about how it interacts with the existing community relationships. This town has a particular history with us. Some of it is good. Some of it is complicated." He looked at the notepad. "Something like this could shift that balance." "In a good direction," Emily said. He looked at her. "You're certain of that?" "Yes," she said. "Victor, the people in this community who are already sympathetic to the club are the people who've seen what you actually do here. This gives more people the chance to see that." She held his gaze. "And honestly, you once told me that Raven is the bird that warns others about danger. That's what this is. Warning women about a danger before it becomes a disaster." He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Write me the proposal, formal, number structure, timeline." She had the proposal on his desk by Friday. She also had by that Friday something she hadn't anticipated, which was that the news of what she was building had traveled through the club's channels before she had formally presented anything in the way that all significant information traveled in this community, and the response had not been what she expected. It had been Carver who told her. He came to the bar mid-morning when Carmen was handling the shift, found Emily reviewing the proposal draft at the end of the counter, and sat across from her with the particular directness that she had come to understand was his version of warmth. "I heard what you're doing," he said. "Victor hasn't approved it yet," she said. "He'll approve it," Carver said with the certainty of a man who had known Victor Blackwood for 20-something years. He picked up the coffee she'd automatically poured for him. "I want to help." She looked at him. "My daughter," he said, "the one I told you about, in Denver." He set the coffee down. "She got out of a bad situation 2 years ago. She had resources I didn't know she didn't have. She figured it out eventually." He was quiet for a moment. "If something like what you're describing had existed when she was in it, she wouldn't have spent 8 months getting to the point where she could figure it out herself." His voice was even, but she could hear underneath it the specific pain of a parent who had found out too late and couldn't unknow it. "I want to help, whatever you need, space contacts, money, whatever." She looked at him for a moment. Carver, who had watched her for weeks with suspicious eyes, who had decided she was the opposite of a problem, who had a daughter in Denver he was clearly so proud of that it came through in a single sentence every time he mentioned her. "Thank you," she said. She meant it completely. He nodded once and picked up his coffee, and the conversation was done. But he left $200 on the counter when he left, in the particular way of a man who was not comfortable with formal processes, but needed to do something tangible, and she put it in the proposal as the first contribution. Victor approved the proposal the following Monday. He called her into the office, set the proposal on the desk between them, and said, "One condition." She waited. "You run it," he said, "not alongside everything else as an extra, as a primary responsibility. Ridge Materials has a management infrastructure. Now it can function with less of your direct time. This needs someone's full attention." He paused. "I'll restructure your salary to reflect both roles." She stared at him. "Victor, the Ridge Materials work isn't finished. There are still 2 vendor contracts that need—" "Jorge can handle the vendor contracts," Victor said. "You trained him for 3 months. It's time to trust the training." She opened her mouth, closed it, thought about the staff meeting where she had watched Jorge absorb information with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been waiting his whole career to be given real responsibility. Thought about what Victor had told her about the 60-something woman in the motel who had said, "Before you can change anything, you have to understand why it is the way it is." She had understood, and then she had changed things, and then she had trusted the people she'd trained. "Okay," she said. The back building took 3 weeks to prepare. The work was done by Bishop's construction crew at cost because Bishop had heard about the program and shown up one morning with his foreman and said without preamble, "We're doing the renovation, don't argue." She hadn't argued. She had made sure they had good coffee and had personally reviewed the work at every stage, not because she doubted them, but because it was her nature to pay attention to things being built. It was during those 3 weeks that the first woman arrived. Not through any formal channel. The program didn't have formal channels yet. Emily was still building those. She arrived the way Emily had arrived, which was to say she appeared one night at the bar with a backpack and nothing else. and the particular look of someone who had just done the most terrifying thing they had ever done and hadn't yet processed it. Her name was Rosa. She was 29. She had driven from Tucson with $40 and a phone she'd already turned off because she understood from something a friend had told her that the phone could be tracked. Carmen noticed her first the way Emily had taught Carmen to notice certain things, not the obvious distress, but the particular quality of someone sitting very still in a way that looked calm but wasn't. Carmen came and found Emily, who was in the back building, reviewing the renovation progress with Bishop's foreman, and said, "There's a woman at the bar. She reminds me of you the first week." Emily went to the bar. She sat across from Rosa and she said, "What do you need right now?" Not what happened or "Are you okay?" or any of the questions that seemed helpful, but were actually about the asker's need to understand before they committed to helping. Just what do you need right now? Rosa looked at her. Her eyes were the particular redness of someone who had not allowed themselves to cry for a very long time. "I need somewhere to sleep," Rosa said. "Just tonight. I'll figure out the rest." "Okay," Emily said. "You can have my room tonight. It's small, but it's private, and it locks." She paused. "Tomorrow we'll talk about the rest." Rosa stared at her. "You don't know me," she said, the specific disbelief of someone who has learned through experience that help has conditions. "I don't need to know you," Emily said. "You came in here, that's enough." She gave Rosa her room. She slept on the office couch, which she had done once before during a particularly long Ridge Materials deadline, and which was not comfortable but was entirely fine. In the morning, she made 2 cups of coffee and knocked on her own door, and Rosa opened it looking like someone who had slept for the first time in days. They sat in the bar before it opened, and Emily told Rosa exactly what the program was going to be and what it could do, and then she told Rosa what she had done herself, because that was the only way she knew how to do this. Not as a professional delivering services, as a person who had been in the same place and had found a way through. Rosa listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When Emily finished, Rosa said, "You did all that yourself. The evidence, the lawyer, all of it. By yourself." "Yes," Emily said, "but I had resources that not everyone has. Time. A certain kind of job that gave me access to information. The specific shape of my situation." She looked at Rosa directly. "What I'm building here is so that women who don't have those specific advantages still have a path." Rosa was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I don't have anything documented." "We can start from where you are," Emily said. "That's what lawyers are for. That's what the program is for." Rosa looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in her face, the specific shift of a person who has been carrying something enormous alone and has just been told they don't have to anymore. "Okay," Rosa said. Her voice was very small and very certain at the same time. Emily called her lawyer in Phoenix that morning. Then she called a domestic violence attorney in Tucson, who her Phoenix lawyer had recommended. Then she called a women's organization in Arizona that she had been building a relationship with for 3 weeks. By noon, Rosa had 3 appointments for the following week and a place to stay in the building next door until the formal space was ready. By the time the bar opened that afternoon, Rosa was helping Carmen with the afternoon setup because she had asked if there was something she could do, and Carmen had said yes immediately, which was exactly right. Deke came in at 3 and noticed the new person behind the bar, helping Carmen, and looked at Emily with the raised eyebrow of a man asking a question without wanting to ask it aloud. Emily said quietly, "She's with us." Deke nodded. He ordered his beer. He said to Rosa, who had brought it before he finished, asking, "Good memory." Rosa looked at Emily. Emily looked at her coffee. 2 months later, their program had a name, First Step Forward. It had a nonprofit status, a board of 3, Emily, her Phoenix lawyer, and a woman from the Regional Domestic Violence Network in a physical space in the back building that Bishop's crew had finished 3 days ahead of schedule. It had a relationship with 2 attorneys who offered reduced rate services to program participants, a partnership with a financial literacy organization in Phoenix, and a referral network that connected it to shelters and legal aid organizations across 3 counties. It had, in its first 8 weeks, served 7 women. The local paper ran a story, not a big story. Black Ridge was not a place with a big paper, but a real one, with Emily's name and a photograph and a description of what First Step Forward did and how it had come to exist in the back building of a motorcycle club's property. The story mentioned the Iron Wolves, not extensively, not dramatically, just as a fact the way facts are stated, that the club had provided the space, that the club's members had contributed to the renovation, that the security arrangements for the program were handled by the club's security chief. Jake's name was in the story, one line. Emily had not told him it would be there. He came into the bar the morning the paper ran, and he set it on the counter in front of her and pointed at the line with his name in it and said with a look that was somewhere between amused and genuinely thrown, "Did you know this was happening?" "I approved the quote," she said. He looked at her. The reporter asked who handled security for the program. Emily said, "I said your name." She met his eyes. "You did handle security for the program. You built the access system for the back building, and you established the safety protocols, and you trained Carmen on what to watch for." She paused. "It's accurate." He looked at the paper again, then at her. Something in his expression was doing several things at once, the mild exasperation of someone who had been named without warning, and underneath that, something quieter, something that looked a great deal like being moved without wanting to show it. "I could have used a heads up," he said. "You would have told me to take your name out," Emily said. He paused. "Yes," he said, "I would have." "That's why I didn't give you a heads up," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he made a sound that was almost the laugh she had first heard at the diner 3 months ago, and he picked up his water glass, which was already there because she had put it there, and he went to his stool. The story ran on a Thursday. By Friday, the paper's office had received 11 calls from women asking about the program. 3 of them were from Black Ridge itself, which was a town of fewer than 3,000 people, which told Emily something very specific about the gap between what existed and what was needed. She called the board together that weekend. They met at the back building in the room that smelled like fresh paint and new carpet, and the particular possibility of a space that had been built for something real. Her Phoenix lawyer attended by phone. The woman from the regional network drove 2 hours to be there in person. Emily said, "We need to scale the intake process. We need to be able to handle more volume without losing the quality of the individual attention. And I need your honest assessment of whether our funding is going to hold." They talked for 3 hours. It was the most genuinely collaborative meeting she had been in since she had sat across from procurement teams in her hotel management days, except that this felt different in a way she took a while to locate, less like professional obligation and more like shared purpose. Everyone in the room was there because they wanted to be there, because they believed in the thing they were building, not because it was their job. At the end of the meeting, the woman from the regional network said, "I want to propose something. Our organization has a small grants program for emerging community initiatives. First Step Forward would qualify. The grant amount is modest, but it would cover 2 years of operating expenses at your current scale." She looked at Emily. "And it comes with technical support, meaning we help you build the infrastructure to scale further if the demand holds." Emily looked at her. She thought about $43 in an inventory binder. "Yes," she said, "we want that." The regional network's grant was approved 6 weeks later. The announcement came on a Tuesday afternoon, and Emily was reviewing intake paperwork when her phone rang, and her contact at the network said, "It's approved. Congratulations." She said thank you, hung up, set the phone down, and sat very still for a moment. Then she picked up the phone again and called Victor. He answered on the second ring. "The grant came through," she said, a pause. "How much?" she told him. Another pause, then good. She could hear in the single syllable that he was genuinely pleased, which from Victor Blackwood sounded almost identical to his baseline, but wasn't if you knew how to listen. "Victor," she said. "Emily, I want to say something." She had thought about how to say this for weeks, had written versions of it and rejected them, had settled eventually on the fact that the right version was probably the simple one. "When I walked in here, I had nothing. Not just no money, no self, not really. I had this core of myself that Daniel hadn't reached, this thing that kept telling me, figure it out. But I didn't know who the person doing the figuring was anymore." She paused. "This place gave me room to find out. You gave me that." Victor was quiet on the other end. She kept going. "I'm not saying that because I'm grateful. I mean, I am, but that's not why I'm saying it. I'm saying it because I think you should know that what you build here, not the business, the thing, the actual way this place operates, it changes people. You changed me." A pause. "I want you to know that someone noticed." The line was quiet for a long moment. Then Victor said in a voice that was slightly rougher than usual, "You did the changing. You made space for it," she said. He said nothing for a moment. "Then be at the bar at 7. I'm buying the first round. She laughed. An actual laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere real. You never drink. I'll drink water, he said, ceremonially, and he hung up. At 7 o'clock, the bar had a quality to it that she had come to recognize over 6 months, the particular density of a room where people who trust each other have gathered not for an occasion but for each other. Victor was at his stool, Deke was at his usual spot, Carver was there with a rare early arrival. Bishop came in at 7:15 and went immediately to the bar and shook Emily's hand the way he always did with both of his. Marcus, who had given her coffee every morning for 6 months and had never once said anything about it that could be called sentimental, came around from behind where he usually stood and said, "Congratulations," with the directness of a man who had chosen those two syllables very carefully. Jake was at the end of the bar. She brought him his water. He was already looking at her when she set it down. "Big day," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment and, "How does it feel building something like this?" She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about most things now, without the protective layer of managed response that had been her default for years. "Like the work is real," she said. "Not like I'm performing the work. Like it actually matters, and I can feel that it matters." She paused. "I haven't had that in a long time." "Since before him," Jake said. "Maybe before him," she said. "Maybe I needed to go through all of it to get here. I don't know." She looked at the bar, the room, the people in it. "I don't think I'd trade what I built here for not having gone through it," which sounds wrong, but it doesn't sound wrong, Jake said. "It sounds like someone who knows what things cost and has decided the thing they got was worth the price." She looked at him. He said, "Was it?" She held his gaze. 6 months in this place. A settlement that had freed her financially and legally from 3 years of systematic dismantling. A program she had built that had already changed the direction of 7 women's lives. A community of people who had started as the most unlikely source of anything she needed and had turned out to be exactly what she needed. A man at the end of the bar with gray eyes who had given her his direct number and asked if she would actually call it. "Yes," she said, "it was worth it." He nodded. Something in his face settled the way things settle when they found the position they were meant to be in. The evening moved forward the way good evenings move, not toward anything in particular, just deeper into itself. She worked the bar with Carmen, and the night had the quality of many nights now, which was competent and warm and entirely hers. Around 9 o'clock, a woman came in that she didn't recognize. Mid-40s, well-dressed in a way that suggested professional rather than local, with the particular look of someone who had arrived somewhere on purpose and was taking a moment to confirm she was in the right place. Emily caught her eye and nodded toward the end of the bar, the quieter end. The woman came over. "Are you Emily Carter?" she said. "Yes," Emily said. "I read the article in the paper," the woman said. "I drove from Flagstaff." She paused. "I'm a therapist. I specialize in trauma recovery and financial abuse. I've been looking for a community program to partner with for a year and a half." She paused again. "I think you've built what I've been looking for." Emily looked at her. "What's your name?" she said. "Dr. Sarah Okafor," the woman said. Emily looked at her for a moment. 6 months ago, she had walked through a door with nothing. Now someone was driving 2 hours to walk through hers. "Can you meet me here Monday morning?" Emily said. 9 o'clock. I'll have coffee. Dr. Okafor said, "I'll be here." She left. Emily watched her go, and she felt in the specific frequency of that moment the thing that had been growing since the morning she'd woken up and asked herself, not "how do I survive this," but "what do I want to build," felt it reach a point of clarity that was almost physical. This was it. This was the thing. Not just surviving, not just recovering, building something that survived the crisis and kept going. Building something that said, what happened to me was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a story about what's possible when you refuse to let it be the end. She went back to work. At midnight, when the bar was thinning toward closing, Victor stood up from his stool and nodded at her in the way of a man completing his business for the evening. He picked up his jacket. He looked around the bar, once the slow sweep of a person who has been responsible for a place for 22 years and will never quite stop taking the full measure of it before he leaves. Then he looked at Emily. He said, "You know what's different about you from the person who walked in here 6 months ago?" She waited. "You walked in here trying to survive," he said. "You're not trying anymore." He held her gaze. You're doing it." He left. The bar closed at 2. Carmen handled the last of the closing checklist with the efficiency of someone who had made it fully her own, which it was. Emily walked through the space once the way she always did, not checking, but simply present the bar, the tables, the particular silence of a room that had held people and would hold them again tomorrow. She stopped at the end of the bar, Jake's stool, the water glass she'd cleared an hour ago, the ring it had left on the counter. She thought about the man who had sat there almost every night for 6 months, who had watched over this place and the people in it with the particular quality of care that didn't need to announce itself because it was simply something always there. She thought about what he had said to her outside the diner the night he'd asked if it was okay that he wanted to be around her. Not because she needed looking after, because he wanted to. She had spent 3 years with a man who wanted to be around her because controlling her gave him something. She had needed time, more time than she'd admitted to herself, to understand the difference between that and something that was simply true. Something that didn't want anything from her except her own presence. She understood the difference now. She turned off the last light. She walked through the back toward the building where First Step Forward's space was dark and ready for Monday. She walked past it to her own room, the room that had been a cot and a 3-drawer dresser in a window and was now entirely and without question hers. She sat on the edge of the cot. On the dresser was the photograph herself at 22, before Daniel, before the marriage, before 11 months of building evidence in the dark while a man slept in the next room believing she was something he had made. She had put it there on the first night because she had needed to look at the person she was going back to. She didn't need to look at it the same way anymore. She looked at it now and she thought, I know who she is. I know exactly who she is. And I know what she became when someone finally gave her room to be it. Tomorrow, Rosa was coming back to help set up the intake system for the new inquiries from the article. Dr. Okafor was coming Monday. The regional network's technical support team was coming Thursday. Jorge was managing the Ridge Materials vendor meeting in Yucca County without her, and she was 90% certain he was going to handle it better than she would have because he'd been managing it in his mind for the past month and was simply waiting to do it officially. Jake was having dinner with her Sunday at the diner in the booth they had come to think of as theirs without either of them having made a formal decision about it. Victor would be on his stool Monday morning when she got to the bar, and he would have water instead of coffee, and the day would begin. This was her life, built with $43 in an inventory binder and 3 rules and the specific grace of landing in the right place at the right moment and having the presence of mind to recognize it. She lay down. She thought about something Deke had said to her once in one of those slow afternoon conversations over his beer, when he told her pieces of the club's history. He had said the thing people always get wrong about us is they think we chose this place. He had smiled at his beer. We didn't choose it, it chose us, when we needed it most. She understood that now in a way she hadn't then. You don't always choose the place that changes you. Sometimes the truck breaks down on a desert highway at 4 a.m, and you walk 2 miles in the rain toward the only lights you can see, and the lights belong to the most unlikely place you would ever have chosen, and the most unlikely people you would ever have chosen are inside it, and everything about it says you should turn around, and you don't turn around because you have already survived the thing you were most afraid of, and there is nothing left to be afraid of. And so you walk through the door, and the door is the beginning of everything. Emily Carter walked through that door with $43 and left with a life that was entirely her own. Not given, not rescued, not handed to her by circumstance or mercy or luck. Built. One honest day at a time in a desert town in Arizona, surrounded by people who were everything she needed and nothing she expected. The woman who had escaped with nothing became the woman who gave others everything she had learned from losing it all. And that was not a recovery story. It was not a survival story. It was the story of a woman who discovered that the most dangerous place she had ever walked into was the first safe place she had ever truly known, and who decided with the full force of everything she had survived that no woman who came after her would have to face that moment alone.